Layer 1. When you start pretending you're okay, and then forget how to stop. It doesn't begin with a breakdown. It begins with holding things together. Just long enough to get through the meeting. Just long enough to make the dinner. To text back. To smile politely. You tell yourself, I'm just tired. And you move forward. That's all it is. Just tired. You answer people quickly so they don't look too closely. You add emojis. You laugh at the right cues. And inside, something pulls tighter each time, like thread stretching across a tear that's slowly widening. The truth is, the pretending works. For a while, people believe you. They compliment your strength, your resilience. They say things like, you always seem so calm, and you nod, because it's easier than trying to explain the storm that hasn't stopped for months. Eventually, you're not even lying, you're just acting. The role is so rehearsed that the lines come without thought. And then one day, you realize something that makes your chest tighten in a way that has nothing to do with anxiety. You've forgotten how to stop. There is no switch. There is no moment of relief. The act is all you have. You're performing at work, performing at home, even performing in front of the mirror. You say what you're supposed to say, or what you're supposed to wear, do what you're supposed to do. But your voice sounds different now. Your face feels heavier. Your eyes aren't tired, they're vacant. The real you, the one with actual needs and actual feelings, has slipped so far into the background that you can't reach her anymore. You don't remember what she wanted. You don't know what she feels. You just know she's quiet. And that silence is beginning to ache. You wonder if anyone sees it. If anyone notices the delay before you respond. The way you've stopped initiating conversations. The way your laughter comes a beat too late. Or your shoulders never fully relax. But no one says anything. They just keep thanking you for being so easy to be around. So consistent. So put together. You don't scream. You don't cry in public. You don't collapse. You just fade. That's what pretending too long does. It doesn't cause an explosion. It causes an erasure. Not sudden. Not loud. Just slow. And steady. And devastating. And by the time you realize what's happening, you've already vanished behind the very mask you thought was keeping you safe. This is the first layer, where the lie becomes the only truth you can manage. And beneath the perfectly timed replies and practiced expressions, something real quietly withers away. Layer 2, when you can't tell if it's exhaustion or surrender. There comes a point where fatigue begins to lose its meaning, where I'm tired stops referring to muscles or schedules and becomes something far more slippery. You wake up, and it's already there, the weight in your chest, the fog behind your eyes. You don't remember dreaming. You don't remember resting. You just remember closing your eyes and opening them again to another day that already feels too heavy to carry. You tell yourself you need more sleep. You cancel a plan. You take a weekend to recharge. But nothing recharges. You lie on the couch for hours, scrolling through your phone, trying to distract yourself from the echo in your mind that keeps whispering the same quiet phrase. This isn't working. And somewhere deep inside, you know it's not exhaustion. It's surrender. You're not running out of energy. You're running out of fight. You go through the motions because the motions are all that remain. You brush your teeth. You eat because you're supposed to. You open your laptop and answer emails with the bare minimum required to stay afloat. But there's no spark, no urgency, no meaning. Your days feel like rehearsals for a life you're no longer part of. You don't care about deadlines. You don't care about conversations. You don't even care about the things you used to love. Not because they lost value, but because you feel distant from everything that used to matter. It's like watching the world from behind a thick sheet of glass. You can see it, but you can't feel it. And that numbness? It's more terrifying than sadness ever was. People ask how you're doing, and you say, just tired. And in a way, it's true. But what you're tired of isn't work or noise or stress. You're tired of pretending, of hoping, of waking up to the same weight every morning and pretending it's something you can stretch away or drink coffee through. You're tired of telling yourself that if you just push a little more, things will feel different. Because deep down, you stopped believing that a long time ago. This is the second layer, where exhaustion masks a deeper truth. And what looks like burnout on the surface is actually the quiet collapse of your will to keep pretending this is still sustainable. Layer 3. When you stop wanting to be understood. In the beginning, you try to explain. You find metaphors. You reach for language. You want people to get it, not out of pity, but so you can feel less alone in the experience of falling apart. You say things like, "I just feel off," or "I'm not myself lately." You watch their faces, searching for some sign of recognition. Sometimes they nod. Sometimes they offer advice. Sometimes they change the subject. And you realize slowly, painfully, that most people hear your sadness as an inconvenience, a puzzle to fix, a tone to soften, not as something sacred that needs space. Over time, you stop trying to explain, not because you're healed, but because the silence is less disappointing than the responses you've been given. You retreat, not dramatically, just quietly. Fewer texts, shorter replies, polite smiles. You curate your language into something neutral, non-threatening. You master the art of saying, "I'm good," in a way that sounds believable. And inside, something turns hard. You don't want to open up anymore. You don't want to cry in front of anyone. You don't want to hand people pieces of your pain just to watch them drop it because it's too heavy or too complex. You tell yourself it's better this way, safer. And maybe it is. But it's also lonelier than you imagined. Eventually, you find yourself surrounded by people who know your habits, but not your heart. They laugh with you, work with you, maybe even love you. But they don't see you, not the part that aches in silence. Not the part that wakes up each day with a leaden chest and a looping thought. Will it always feel like this? You stop wanting to be seen. You stop hoping someone will ask again, and mean it. You learn to carry your pain like a hidden scar, invisible, but still tender to the touch. This is the third layer, where connection starts to feel like exposure. And even though your heart still longs to be known, your mind has already decided it's better to stay quiet, stay distant, and stay safe from the misunderstandings that hurt more than the loneliness itself. Layer 4. When small decisions feel like unbearable weight. There's a quiet kind of fear that creeps in without warning, the kind that turns choosing a sandwich into a moment of paralysis. It sounds absurd until you're standing in front of the fridge, staring blankly, heart racing, stomach tight, unable to pick between toast or cereal. It's not about hunger. It's not about preference. It's about the crushing pressure of having to make one more choice when your mind feels like it's already spent everything it had just to get you out of bed. Every little decision, answering a text, opening an email, walking to the store, begins to carry a disproportionate weight. Not because the task is hard, but because you're already carrying too much. You used to move through life without overthinking. Choose a shirt, pick a route, decide where to go for dinner. Now, every choice feels loaded. You worry about making the wrong one. You worry about how long it will take. You worry that it won't feel worth it. And so you avoid. You delay. You pretend you forgot. But really, you just don't have the capacity to deal with it. The thought of making yet another decision, however small, feels like asking a broken engine to start again without fuel. And the guilt follows. You ask yourself, why is this so hard for me? You judge your own hesitation. You compare yourself to others, friends who seem to move through the day with ease, while you're stuck at a mental crossroads over things that used to take seconds. You're not lazy. You're overwhelmed. But the world doesn't see the difference. So, you hide it. You nod along. You say, "I'll figure it out later," while part of you drowns quietly in the pressure of choices that feel too big for a brain that's already collapsing under the noise. This is the fourth layer, where even the smallest act of decision becomes a mirror, showing you not your indecisiveness, but the sheer weight your mind is already holding. And in that stillness, You realize you're not choosing between toast or cereal. You're choosing whether or not to pretend, once again, that you can handle things like you used to. Layer 5. When joy becomes a memory instead of a feeling. There's a day, and you won't notice it at first, when joy stops being something you feel and starts being something you remember. You'll smile at a joke and feel nothing behind it. You'll listen to a song that once lit something up in your chest, and it'll just sound like noise. You'll be in the middle of something beautiful, a sunset, a hug, a moment of quiet, and instead of being moved, you'll feel like a guest peeking through the window of your own life. Emotionally detached, present, but untouched. This isn't numbness in the obvious sense. It's not the total absence of feeling. It's a distortion, a disconnection. You know what happiness should feel like. You recognize its outline, its colors, its sound, but when you reach for it, nothing lands. You remember that you used to laugh more freely. You remember a time when a message from a friend could brighten your whole day, when finishing a project felt satisfying, when a walk in the cold made you feel alive. But now it's just echoes, footprints in snow that has long since melted. You try. You really do. You push yourself to do the things that used to matter. You go out. You participate. You tell yourself, maybe this will help. But it doesn't. And when the joy doesn't come, you feel something even heavier, grief. Not just sadness, but a mourning for the parts of you that felt alive, excited, curious. You miss her. The version of you who didn't have to work so hard just to feel anything. And that missing becomes a wound of its own, one you carry quietly, even as the world claps for your efforts. This is the 5th layer, where joy becomes a ghost, and your life, once full of color, starts to feel like a black and white photograph you keep trying to color in from memory, even though the crayons no longer work. Layer 6, when you start avoiding the mirror. There comes a moment when looking in the mirror stops being a neutral act and starts feeling like confrontation. Not because of vanity or insecurity, but because something in your reflection begins to feel unfamiliar. Your face is still yours, same skin, same eyes, same routine, but the energy behind it has shifted. The light is dimmer. The posture is tighter. There's a fatigue etched into your features that makeup can't soften and sleep can't erase. And it hurts, not because you've changed, but because you don't remember when you changed. You just know you're not the same. At first, you glance less. You brush your teeth without lifting your eyes. You do your hair mechanically, eyes fixed anywhere but your own. Then, you start avoiding mirrors altogether. Not because you hate how you look, but because you can't bear to face the person who's holding it together by threads. The person who smiles for others but sighs the second the door closes. The person who's showing up just enough to keep people from asking too many questions. The mirror becomes too honest, too clear. It reflects not just your features, but your exhaustion, your pain, your disconnection. And when you do accidentally lock eyes with yourself, something strange happens. Your expression doesn't change, not even a flicker. You stare at yourself like you would a stranger, neutral, distant, as if you're seeing someone you used to know. This is the 6th layer, where your reflection no longer offers recognition. And you begin to understand that the hardest part of falling apart isn't what others see, it's what you can no longer see in yourself. Layer 7, when every sound feels like a threat. It's not just in your head anymore. It's in your ears. The world feels louder, sharper, more invasive than it used to be. A phone ding makes you flinch. A door creak sets your jaw on edge. Conversations feel like they're happening too close, even when people are across the room. Music that once brought you comfort now makes your heart race. The clatter of dishes, the bark of a dog, the sudden ping of a message. Each sound seems to cut through you like glass. It isn't about volume. It's about pressure. Every sound feels like it demands something from you. Attention, response, awareness. And you have nothing left to give. You begin to crave silence. Not just quiet, but the kind of silence that erases everything. You turn off your notifications. You walk slower. You avoid crowds. You stop watching the news. You turn down the brightness on your phone. And even then, the noise doesn't stop. Because the sound isn't just outside, it's inside you now. The tightness in your shoulders, the racing thoughts, the pounding behind your eyes, it's all become one endless hum. And even in a still room, you feel like you're being shouted at by life itself. You try to explain it to someone, and they say, maybe you're just sensitive today. But it's not today. It's been days, weeks, maybe longer. And you can't tell whether the world got louder or you just lost your buffer. The protective layer between you and stimulation, whatever used to absorb the sharpness of things, has worn thin. And now everything cuts straight through. So you withdraw. You don't pick up calls. You cancel plans. You sit in dark rooms and feel bad about needing to. You worry that you're becoming difficult, fragile, overreactive. But it's not about being weak. It's about being full, overflowing. Your nervous system, your mind, your emotions, all overstretched. Like an instrument pulled too tight. And every sound feels like the final note that might break you. This is the seventh layer, where the world becomes too loud for a mind that's already unraveling. And peace, once a luxury, becomes a basic need you can no longer find. Layer 8, when you begin to fear your own thoughts. There's a shift that happens, not all at once, but slowly, like the dimming of light at dusk. You're thinking, like always, replaying conversations, imagining outcomes, planning, worrying. But something changes in the way the thoughts feel. They become darker, sharper, more intrusive. A voice in your head, your own voice, begins saying things you don't want to hear. Not because they're loud, but because they're true, or at least they feel true in that moment. Thoughts like, I don't think I can do this anymore, or nothing is going to change, or worse, the ones that carry no words, just heaviness. You try to reason with them. You tell yourself they're just thoughts. You try positive affirmations. You try distraction. But they linger. They circle. They dig. And soon, it's not just what you're thinking, it's the fear of what you might think next. You begin to dread being alone with your own mind. Not because it's chaotic, but because it's convincing. You know deep down that these thoughts don't define you, but they feel more real than anything anyone else says. So you keep quiet. You don't tell anyone how dark it's gotten. You don't want to scare them. You don't want to hear cliches. You don't want to feel like a burden. And most of all, you don't want to admit how much control your thoughts have started to gain. You go about your day, holding conversations, completing tasks, smiling when required, all while managing a silent, internal storm that no one else can see. What's exhausting isn't the thoughts themselves. It's the constant negotiation, the inner arguments, the defensive stance you have to take against your own mind, every hour of every day. And it doesn't help that the outside world continues to function normally, as if you're not quietly losing the most intimate part of your existence, your peace. This is the eighth layer, where your mind becomes the battlefield, and the one place you're supposed to feel safe, inside yourself, becomes the place you fear most. Layer 9, when you start disappearing from your own life. You're still there. Technically, your name is still on the calendar. Your clothes still hang in the closet. Your social media still shows your last few smiles. But inside, you've begun to vanish. You no longer feel connected to the events you attend. You forget what you said in conversations. You reread texts you don't remember writing. People hug you, and it feels like they're hugging through glass. You look at your hands and wonder when they last felt like yours. It's not dissociation in the clinical sense. It's more like emotional erosion. Like every day, a little more of you fades from the picture. At work, you finish tasks automatically. You respond with the right words. You participate in meetings, but your voice sounds distant to your own ears. You check boxes, but feel no reward. At home, you do the dishes, feed the pet, fold the laundry, but none of it feels real. It's as if you're performing rituals for a life you're no longer spiritually tied to. You begin to see your life like a movie, scenes moving forward without your input. You watch yourself eat, speak, sit, scroll. You're the main character, but you've forgotten the plot, forgotten the reason, forgotten the you behind all of it. Even memories start to feel secondhand. You remember the facts, but not the feeling. You can recall the laughter, but not the joy. It's like every part of you has been slowly turned down, like a light fading in a room you didn't realize was going dark. No one notices, or at least, they don't say anything. Maybe because your routine is still intact. Maybe because people are trained to look for loud signs of pain, not the silent kind that mimics functioning. You begin to wonder how much more you can fade before someone asks where you went, before someone realizes the version of you they see is just a placeholder. This is the ninth layer, where you're still present in your world, but absent from yourself. And the tragedy isn't just that you're disappearing, it's that no one seems to notice you're gone. Layer 10, when you start saying, I don't know to everything. There's a quiet breaking point where your default answer to almost everything becomes, I don't know. Not because you've suddenly lost intelligence, but because the connection between what you feel, what you think, and what you can express has frayed. People ask you simple questions. What do you want to eat? What's bothering you? Are you okay? And you feel your mouth pause, not out of confusion, but emptiness. You search for clarity, for a response that feels honest. But your brain only offers fog. And so you say, again and again, I don't know. But that phrase is more than an answer. It's a quiet confession that something fundamental inside you has gone dark. This doesn't come from indecisiveness. It comes from detachment. It comes from the exhaustion of trying to decipher feelings that don't translate neatly into words. It's not that you don't care. It's that you can't locate the part of yourself that used to care, and you don't know how to explain that. The gap between you and your own thoughts grows wider, and instead of fighting to cross it, you just stop trying. It's easier to shrug, to dodge, to pretend the answer is still forming when really, you feel nothing at all. At first, people are patient. They nod. They wait. They offer suggestions. But over time, they start to feel frustrated, like you're being evasive or emotionally closed off. And that hurts, because you want to be understood, but you can't give what you don't have. You can't offer clarity when your entire internal world feels like a room where the lights have been turned off and no one remembered where the switch was. Eventually, the phrase, I don't know, becomes armor, a way to keep people from probing too deep, a way to avoid having to perform insight or stability. But inside, it feels like failure. You were once someone who knew, someone who had opinions, preferences, goals. Now, you feel more like a mirror, reflecting what others say, offering vague shapes instead of real substance. And you wonder how much of you is still intact underneath all that uncertainty. This is the 10th layer, where your ability to articulate yourself slips away. And I don't know becomes the placeholder for everything you've lost the language to describe. Layer 11, when you begin to feel like a burden for simply existing. It starts small, the hesitation before you send a message, the apology at the start of every sentence, the quiet flinch when someone asks if you're okay. You begin to feel like your presence takes up too much space, like your pain is an inconvenience. Even the things you don't say feel like a weight on others. You start overthinking every interaction. Did I talk too much? Did I sound too negative? Should I have smiled more? Should I have said nothing at all? Soon, your internal filter tightens. You stop reaching out, even when you need to. You cancel plans not because you're busy, but because you can't stand the thought of being too much. You start erasing your needs in real time, catching yourself before asking for help, editing out your emotions in conversation, pretending you're fine just so the other person doesn't feel awkward. And what you don't realize, at first, is that this isn't humility. It's a kind of self-erasure, one you didn't consent to, but learned through subtle social cues and emotional fatigue. It's not that people are unkind. In fact, they might be incredibly supportive. but your brain rewrites their responses anyway. A pause becomes rejection. A sigh becomes annoyance. A delayed reply becomes proof that you're asking for too much. And over time, you internalize a message that no one actually sent you. You are a burden. Not because of anything you've done, but because of what you feel. And if what you feel is too loud, too messy, too complicated, you believe it must be hidden. So you shrink. You choose silence. You smile when you're aching. You say, "I'm good," when you're unraveling. You make yourself small in conversations. You pretend your sadness is gone just to protect someone else's comfort. And the tragedy is that no one sees it, the self-sacrifice, the quiet guilt, the daily, invisible decision to prioritize someone else's peace over your own pain. This is the 11th layer, where you start to carry the unbearable weight of your own existence. And even being honest feels selfish in a world that teaches you to apologize for simply needing to be held. Layer 12. When motivation becomes a myth you no longer believe in. You used to have goals, lists, systems, alarms, a vision of what your life could look like if only you stayed disciplined. You had energy, maybe not constant, but available, enough to push through tasks, to build habits, to feel that flicker of accomplishment at the end of a productive day. But now, even simple goals feel like fiction, like artifacts from a different life. The thought of progress doesn't excite you. It doesn't even scare you. It just feels irrelevant. You still wake up. You still go to work. But it's all automatic. The checklist means nothing now. The self-help podcasts blur into each other. The motivational posts make you feel worse. Not better. Not because you disagree with them, but because you remember when they used to work. And now they don't. You don't resist productivity. You're just not moved by it anymore. The fire that once pushed you to be better, faster, more efficient has gone out. Not dramatically, just silently. And you didn't notice until someone asked. "So, what are you working on these days?" And you had no answer. You don't daydream anymore. You don't plan for next month. You stop making resolutions. Because what's the point? You've begun to see your life less like a story you're writing and more like a set of repeating scenes. The same start, the same finish. No arc, just function. And when you do try to break the cycle, start a new habit, change a routine, the spark fizzles out within days. It's not failure. It's emptiness. You're not even discouraged. You're just blank. This is the 12th layer, where the engine dies quietly. And what people mistake for laziness or procrastination is actually the absence of something you used to rely on, a reason to move forward. Layer 13, when you can't feel pride in anything you do. You complete the task. You send the email. You meet the deadline. You cross something off the list that's been haunting you for weeks. But instead of relief, instead of pride, there's only silence. No internal celebration. No lightness. No quiet pat on the back. Just a blank emotional screen where something meaningful used to appear. You know you should feel accomplished. You even tell yourself, "Well done." But the words don't land anywhere. They vanish before they echo. You begin to question if you've ever really felt proud, or if you just mistook relief for pride all along. You think about moments that should have felt like milestones, graduation, promotions, creative wins. And when you revisit those memories, they feel like they happened to someone else. You remember the applause, the messages of congratulations, the smiles, but you can't remember what it felt like inside. There's no trace of that warmth now. No evidence that the praise ever registered as truth. This becomes a deeper kind of emptiness. Because it's not about failure. You're not failing. You're functioning. You're doing what's expected. But somewhere along the way, the ability to take ownership of your own effort disappeared. Your self-worth became so brittle, so conditional, that even your successes feel borrowed. Or worse, meaningless. You begin to move through life like a ghost with a resume. The boxes are checked. The metrics are met. But none of it touches you. When people compliment you, you deflect. Not out of humility, but because you genuinely don't believe you deserve it. Not because you didn't work hard, but because it feels like the work came from survival, not passion. You want to care. You want to glow with pride. But instead, every achievement feels like something you faked your way through. Like you were lucky enough not to collapse before the deadline. And that's all. This is the 13th layer, where validation stops sticking. And no matter what you accomplish, your mind has forgotten how to let you feel proud of anything at all. Layer 14, when you stop trusting good days. You wake up, and strangely, you feel okay. Not euphoric, not amazing, just okay. Your chest doesn't feel heavy. The thoughts aren't spiraling. The world doesn't seem hostile. You breathe, and it feels normal. And for a fleeting moment, you think, maybe I'm coming out of it. Maybe this is the beginning of healing. Maybe you're finally on the upswing. But instead of feeling grateful, something else creeps in, suspicion. You begin to scan for the catch, the crack in the pavement, the thread that's going to unravel. You wait for the anxiety to return, because it always does. You tell yourself not to get too comfortable, because comfort has turned into something dangerous. The calm no longer feels like peace. It feels like a setup, a trick, a quiet before a storm that always, inevitably, finds its way back to you. And so you don't enjoy the good day. You monitor it. You question it. You walk through it like someone tiptoeing across thin ice. Every laugh is accompanied by a whisper, "Don't trust this." Every moment of quiet is shadowed by a fear that it won't last. Because it never does. Eventually, the fear of the fall becomes worse than the fall itself. You learn not to let your guard down, even during moments of ease. Because the last time you believed the worst was over, it came back harder. And you promised yourself you wouldn't be caught off guard again. This is the 14th layer, where joy becomes suspicious. And even the good days are ruined by the haunting memory of how fast they tend to disappear. Layer 15, when you feel homesick for a place that doesn't exist. There's an ache you can't name. It arrives in the quiet hours, while doing dishes, scrolling through photos, sitting in traffic. It's not loneliness. Not exactly. And it's not nostalgia, either. It's something stranger. A homesickness for something you've never had. A longing for a version of life you've never lived. A craving for a sense of peace that has never actually been yours, yet still feels like a memory you can't quite reach. You picture it sometimes, this other life. You don't know what it looks like exactly, but you know how it feels. There's quiet there, stability, maybe even joy. You imagine waking up without dread, talking without rehearsing, laughing without effort, being loved without exhaustion. You imagine a world where your nervous system isn't always bracing, where your mind doesn't chew on itself, where your heart doesn't flinch at tenderness. And though it's just an image, it makes you cry, not because you had it and lost it, but because you fear you may never have it at all. It's a cruel kind of grief, mourning for something abstract, something theoretical. And yet, the ache is real as any goodbye you've ever had to say. You try to explain it, but how do you tell someone you're grieving a version of life you never got to live? So, you keep it to yourself, and the ache follows you, through crowded rooms and empty nights. It sits in your throat when someone asks how you're doing. It sits behind your smile when someone says, "You've got so much going for you." And all you can think is, maybe. But none of it feels like home. This is the 15th layer, where longing stops being tied to people or places and becomes a quiet ache for the version of life that always seemed just slightly out of reach. Layer 16, when conversations start to feel like performances. You're talking, you're nodding, you're saying all the right things. But inside, there's a strange disconnect, as if you're watching yourself from somewhere just behind your own eyes. The words are coming out smoothly. Your facial expressions are perfectly timed. But the part of you that used to feel present in the interaction is long gone. What remains is a version of you built for the stage. Polite, predictable, pleasant. You're not connecting, you're performing. It begins with small moments. You notice you're repeating the same stories, the same jokes, the same safe opinions. Not because you're trying to manipulate, but because you don't have the emotional energy to create something real. You don't ask questions you genuinely care about. You nod even when you don't understand. You laugh even when you don't feel amusement. And no one notices, because you're good at this. Because people like the version of you that plays well in conversation. The version that doesn't need too much, that doesn't interrupt, that never brings the room down. But inside, it's exhausting. Every social interaction becomes another act to survive. You start dreading small talk. Not because you're shy, but because it feels like work. Emotional labor. The strain of pretending to be engaged when you feel like you're floating outside your own body. And it gets worse when someone asks something real, something sincere, because now you have to make a choice. Break character and risk vulnerability. Or stay in the role and feel the growing ache of self-abandonment. Eventually, you begin avoiding people. Not because you don't care, but because you can't bear to pretend anymore. The mask feels too heavy, the role too practiced. You want to scream mid-conversation. Do you not see how far I've drifted? But you never do, because you know how to keep the performance clean, seamless, socially acceptable. This is the 16th layer, where conversation becomes theater. And though you're still speaking, still smiling, still being seen, your presence is just a script, and your soul has quietly left the room. Layer 17, when memories start to lose their meaning. You try to remember a good time, a vacation, a celebration, a summer evening when everything felt warm. But the details are blurry. The colors are faded. You remember the event, but not the feeling. Like watching a home video with the sound turned off. You know you were there. You see yourself in the images. But something vital is missing. The spark, the texture, the emotional imprint. It's gone. And that emptiness is more frightening than forgetting. At first, you think it's just stress. Maybe you've been overwhelmed. But as the days pass, you realize it's not just the good memories. Even the painful ones feel abstract. You recall the facts, the timelines, but the emotional link has frayed. You try to feel something, joy, grief, nostalgia, but there's no reaction, no resonance, just static. This doesn't feel like memory loss. It feels like meaning loss. Like your emotional archives have been rearranged by a stranger. You can still access the files, but they don't belong to you anymore. You tell stories about your past like a tour guide, not a participant. People say, "That must have been amazing." And you smile. You agree. But inside, you're unsure. Not because it wasn't amazing, but because you can't feel it anymore. And that loss of emotional continuity creates another form of detachment. You start to question your identity. If your past doesn't feel like yours, if your memories feel muted and distant, who are you now? What is your story made of? If even the good chapters no longer speak to you. This is the 17th layer, where memory loses its warmth. And the story of your life begins to feel like a book you've read before, but can no longer feel moved by. Layer 18, when you begin to apologize for your silence. You didn't mean to go quiet. It just happened. One unread message turned into 5. One missed call turned into a week. The words didn't stop because you were angry or distant. They stopped because you couldn't find them. Not the right ones. Not even the wrong ones. Just none at all. And as the days passed, you watched the silence grow longer, heavier, more noticeable, until you began to carry it like guilt. You want to explain it, but where would you begin? How do you tell someone that it's not them, that it's not even you, but the invisible weight sitting on your chest every time you try to type a sentence? You begin to draft replies, then delete them. You pick up the phone, then put it down. You want to connect, but the act of reaching out feels insurmountable, like trying to swim upstream with lungs full of stone. And when you finally do write back, it begins with sorry. Sorry for being quiet. Sorry for disappearing. Sorry for needing time. Sorry for existing in a way that's inconvenient. You're not just apologizing for the delay. You're apologizing for your own internal struggle, for having limits, for not knowing how to be on all the time. People might understand, or they might not, but the apology remains, because silence has become something you feel ashamed of, even though it's the only language your exhaustion could speak. This is the 18th layer, where silence becomes an act of survival, and every attempt to reconnect begins with guilt, as though your pain needs permission to take up space. Layer 19, when you feel like you're falling behind at existing. It's not just about work anymore. It's not just deadlines or goals or productivity. It's something deeper, something existential. A creeping sense that you're falling behind at being a person. You scroll through your feed and see people laughing, building, thriving, and you're happy for them, at least on the surface. But beneath that, something stirs, a quiet shame that you can't seem to keep up with the basic pace of life. You notice it in the smallest things. Someone talks about a book they're reading, and you realize you haven't finished one in months. Someone mentions cooking dinner, and you remember the third night in a row of eating cereal at 9 p.m. You forget to respond to texts, not because you don't care, but because the act of replying feels monumental. You miss birthdays. You wear the same clothes until laundry becomes necessity, and it all adds up, a collection of missed moments and unfinished to-dos that whisper, "You're not doing life right." This isn't laziness. It's depletion. You're not disengaged. You're overwhelmed. But the world doesn't stop to wait for you to catch your breath. It races ahead, and every day you lag behind, the distance between who you are and who you're supposed to be grows larger. You look around and feel like a late arrival to a game you no longer know how to play. And the worst part, you feel like you should be grateful. You have enough to survive. You have things others would envy. But the shame still grows. Because it's not about what you have. It's about what you can no longer manage. The simple rituals of being alive, reaching out, cleaning, showing up, caring, feel out of reach. And each day you don't rise to meet them, a voice inside you whispers, "Everyone else is living. Why can't you?" This is the 19th layer, where existing starts to feel like a race you're always late to, and every skipped step feels like proof that you're quietly being left behind. Layer 20, when you can't remember the last time you felt truly safe. It's not about physical danger. You lock your doors. You check your surroundings. You follow the routines that keep your body secure. But inside, there's a different kind of unease, a restlessness that never fully goes quiet. Even in quiet rooms, even in familiar spaces, your mind remains alert, on guard, waiting for something, though you're not sure what. You just know that true safety, the kind that softens your muscles and lets you exhale completely, hasn't visited you in a long, long time. You try to track it back. When was the last time I felt safe? Not just comfortable, not just unbothered, but genuinely safe, held, allowed to exist without bracing. And the answer doesn't come. Or worse, it comes with a realization that safety, for you, was always conditional, dependent on who was in the room, how well things were going, how much you could control. It was never a resting state, always a reward for doing everything right. Now, even when things are fine, your body doesn't believe it. You're hyper-aware of tones, delays, looks. You preempt judgment. You imagine conflict. You prepare responses to scenarios that haven't happened. Because somewhere along the way, your mind learned that stillness wasn't peace. It was a trap. And now, it refuses to let its guard down. And the body pays the price. You wake up with clenched jaws. You speak with tight shoulders. You fall asleep to tension that never unravels. And no one sees it. Because you're high-functioning. You're polite. You're even funny. But inside, you're always scanning the room, physical or emotional, for danger that doesn't yet exist. This is the 20th layer, where safety becomes a memory instead of a feeling, and your mind, long trained for survival, forgets how to rest, even when you're finally alone. Layer 21, when you start measuring your worth by what you hide. There's a quiet calculation you begin to make. Not about what you've accomplished, but about what you've contained. You begin to feel proud of how little you've shared, how much pain you've hidden, how smoothly you've concealed the ache behind your ribs. It becomes a strange, hollow currency, the ability to function while fractured, to smile while sinking, to carry your breakdown like a secret medal of discipline no one will ever see. People praise your composure. They call you strong. They admire how calm you seem, how dependable. And each compliment lands like a knife, because they're not wrong. But they don't know what they're praising. They don't see the internal bleeding. They don't know that every moment of quiet is earned through suppression, that your stillness is not peace, but pressure. You begin to keep track, not of wins, but of withholds. You remember the moment you almost cried and didn't, the time you wanted to scream and instead swallowed it with a smile. You begin to count restraint as strength, not because it heals you, but because it lets you survive without disturbing others. But over time, something breaks, because hiding pain doesn't make it disappear. It just buries it deeper, until it starts speaking in other ways, in headaches, fatigue, irritability, numbness. Your body becomes the outlet your words were denied. And suddenly, the control you were proud of starts to look like a prison you built with your own silence. This is the 21st layer, where emotional strength becomes measured not by what you feel, but by what you manage to keep unseen. And beneath the image of calm, the real you quietly disappears. Layer 22, when you start avoiding hope because it hurts too much. Hope used to be a lifeline, a distant light that helped you move forward. Even when everything around you felt heavy, you held on to future plans, imagined better days, believed in the idea that things would eventually shift. And for a while, that belief gave you strength. But now, even hope feels dangerous. Even imagining improvement brings with it a kind of ache you didn't expect, like reopening a wound you've worked so hard to numb. You don't dare visualize the better version of yourself anymore. The one who sleeps peacefully. The one who laughs without effort. The one who feels safe in her own skin. Because every time you get close to believing in her again, something collapses. A setback. A disappointment. A reminder that healing is not a straight line. And sometimes, it's not even a line at all, just a circle you keep walking, waiting for the exit. So you protect yourself. Not from pain, but from possibility. You stop making plans. You stop setting goals. You tell yourself it's realism. But deep down you know, it's fear. You're afraid of the fall that follows the rise. You're afraid of how much it hurts when things almost get better. So instead, you keep your eyes down. You settle. You convince yourself that wanting less is wiser. And in doing so, you build a small, quiet life inside your head. One where nothing extraordinary ever happens. But at least you're safe from the sharp edge of disappointment. People try to encourage you. They say, you have so much potential, or things can turn around. And you nod. You smile. But inside, a part of you turns away. Not because you're hopeless, but because you've tasted hope before, and it left scars. This is the 22nd layer, where hope becomes a risk you're no longer willing to take. And you choose numbness over longing, because dreaming of light starts to feel more painful than living in the dark. Layer 23, when your future feels like a blank page you're afraid to write on. There's something haunting about a blank page. It's full of possibility, yes, but also full of pressure, of uncertainty, of judgment. And that's what your future has started to feel like. Not a place you're moving toward, but a question you no longer want to answer. You stop thinking about next month. You avoid conversations about plans. You shrug when people ask what's next. Not because you don't have ideas, but because the effort to imagine yourself in them feels unreachable. You used to dream. Not big, necessarily, but vividly. You could see yourself in places, in roles, in scenes that felt believable. And even if the dream changed, you still had one. Now, the canvas is empty. Not with freedom, but with fear. Because every attempt to sketch a future ends with you staring at your own absence in it. You can't see yourself 5 years from now. You can't even see a version of tomorrow that feels true. Not because you're lost, but because the connection between who you are and who you could be has frayed. It's not a lack of ambition. It's emotional disorientation, a disconnection from the story you were writing. You feel like a character without a plot, still moving, still speaking, but with no arc. And so you begin to drift, one day into the next, one task into another. You do what's needed. You keep up appearances, but the blankness grows behind your eyes. The page remains untouched. And perhaps the scariest part is that no one notices, because you're still doing fine. You're still high functioning. You're still showing up. But inside, you're standing at the edge of an unwritten life, unsure of whether to take the pen or quietly walk away from the story altogether. This is the 23rd layer, where the future no longer feels exciting or terrifying. It just feels unreachable. And the weight of not knowing becomes heavier than any answer ever could be. Layer 24, when you begin to miss yourself without knowing what that means. There's a quiet moment that hits you out of nowhere, folding laundry, staring at the ceiling, hearing a song from a few years back. You feel a sudden ache, sharp and wordless, a longing that doesn't point to a person or a place, just a sense that something is missing. And then you realize, it's you. You miss yourself. Not the version that was always happy or successful or put together, but the version that felt real to you. The one that wasn't hiding all the time. The one that could feel things fully without breaking under the weight of them. It's hard to describe this kind of grief. You don't have a photo to look at or a specific moment to return to. You just know that you don't feel like you anymore. Your laugh sounds different. Your posture has changed. Your thoughts come from a place you don't fully recognize. And the person moving through your life feels like a well-rehearsed actor, good at delivering lines, terrible at believing them. You begin to wonder when the shift happened. Was it gradual? A slow erosion of identity, chipped away by stress and disappointment and quiet survival? Or did it happen all at once? Some invisible fracture you didn't feel until long after it broke? Either way, the loss is real, and the worst part is that no one else sees it. Because from the outside, you're still you. Same name, same smile, same voice. But you know better. You try to find pieces of her, the old you, in habits, hobbies, photos. But it's like chasing a ghost. She's close enough to remember, but too far to hold. And sometimes, in your most exhausted moments, you wonder if she was ever real to begin with, or if she was just a temporary state, a glimpse of who you could be, before the world required you to become someone else. This is the 24th layer, where the ache isn't for a person or a time, but for the version of yourself that used to feel whole. And the silence that follows is your heart quietly asking, where did I go? Layer 25, when you stop reacting to things that used to bother you. You used to feel everything, even too much. At times, a rude comment would sting. A canceled plan would disappoint. A missed opportunity would echo for days. But lately, you notice a shift. Things happen, unfair things, hurtful things, and you feel nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a kind of dull acknowledgement, as if you're watching someone else's life happen in front of you. And in a strange way, it almost feels like progress. Like maybe you've grown thicker skin. Like maybe you've finally become unbothered. But that's not what this is. Because it's not peace. It's not maturity. It's numbness. You're not choosing to rise above. You've simply lost the energy to care. The emotions don't register. Not because the situation isn't painful, but because your system is already overloaded. There's no space left for reaction. You receive the blow and absorb it in silence, as if your heart no longer remembers how to flinch. At first, it feels like control, but soon, you realize the cost. You begin to wonder why nothing moves you, why things that once felt meaningful now feel distant. You hear a friend share a struggle, and you want to comfort them, but the words don't come. You see injustice or cruelty, and instead of outrage, you feel tired. It's not that you don't care. It's that you can't access the part of yourself that used to burn for what was right or cry for what was wrong. And in that numbness, you lose something vital, your connection to the world and to yourself, because feeling deeply wasn't your weakness. It was your aliveness. This is the 25th layer, where indifference isn't healing, it's depletion, and the silence in your heart isn't peace, but the quiet that follows too many unanswered alarms. Layer 26. When you feel most alone in a room full of people. You're not isolated. You're surrounded. There are voices around you, laughter nearby, maybe even someone sitting next to you. You nod. You smile. You say the right things. But inside, you feel more alone than you ever have in silence. The distance between you and the world isn't measured in space. It's measured in connection, or the lack of it. No one's done anything wrong. It's not that they don't care. It's just that the version of you they're interacting with isn't the real one. It's the filtered version. The one who can pass as okay. The one who says, "I'm fine," so convincingly that no one thinks to ask twice. And so the moment passes. The conversation moves forward, and you're left behind, sitting in the middle of it all, invisible in plain sight. You try to re-engage. You tell yourself to speak up, to be more honest, but the weight in your chest makes it hard to breathe, let alone talk. You feel like a ghost in your own story, seen, but not known, present, but untouched. And that kind of loneliness, the kind that exists inside connection, is harder to name, harder to explain, because it's not about being unloved. It's about being misread. And when you finally leave the room, or the call, or the event, you feel drained in a way that rest can't fix. Because you weren't just socializing. You were acting, performing the role of someone whole, someone simple, someone easy to be around. This is the 26th layer, where connection becomes a mask, and being surrounded no longer protects you from the deepest loneliness of all, being unseen while fully visible. Layer 27, when your body starts speaking the pain your words can't. It begins subtly, a tight chest, a headache that won't leave, a stomach that churns without warning. You tell yourself it's stress. You hydrate. You rest. You try to push through. But your body doesn't bounce back like it used to. Instead, it begins to keep the score, logging every unsaid word, every unacknowledged ache. Every day you push down your feelings instead of expressing them. And eventually, it speaks up, louder than your voice ever dared to. You start to feel it everywhere. The tension in your jaw, the weight in your limbs, the way your heart races at nothing in particular. You begin to wonder if something's wrong with you physically. Maybe it's illness, maybe hormones, maybe a deficiency. But deep down, you know, your body is screaming the story your mind won't say aloud. I'm not okay. Doctors may find nothing. Tests may come back clean. But your body remains in pain. Because it's carrying more than blood and bones. It's carrying silence, suppressed grief, hidden rage, chronic overperformance, years of emotional debt. And eventually, your nervous system taps out. Your body begins to protest not with words, but with symptoms. And even when you rest, the ache remains because what you need isn't sleep. It's truth. This is the 27th layer, where your body becomes the messenger. And what you've buried too long inside begins to rise, not in language, but in tension, illness, and fatigue that refuses to be ignored. Layer 28. Some days feel like you're watching yourself through glass. It's not detachment all the time. Some moments, you're in it, present, engaged, almost convincing yourself you've turned a corner. But then there are these strange stretches of time when you feel like an observer in your own body. You're brushing your teeth, walking across a parking lot, stirring coffee, and suddenly there's this eerie distance. You can see what you're doing. You hear your voice if you speak, but none of it feels real. It's like the world has slipped behind a pane of glass. You can see it, but you can't touch it. And in those moments, everything feels surreal. You question your own movements. Was that my hand? Did I just say that? Am I really here? Or just simulating presence because I don't know how not to? Your reflection doesn't help. It feels like looking at a stranger who's really good at impersonating you. Her eyes are tired. Her mouth barely curves when she smiles. You know it's your face, but it doesn't spark recognition. Just silence. What unsettles you most isn't the numbness. It's the fact that you're starting to prefer it. Because the glass, for all its distance, offers a kind of protection. If you're not fully in the moment, it can't hurt you. You can float past pain. You can drift through obligations. You can avoid the weight of reality by living beside it, not within it. But there's a cost. Eventually, you forget how to come back. The space behind the glass becomes familiar, safe, and one day, you reach out to feel something, joy, love, even grief, and realize the barrier never left. You never left it. This is the 28th layer, where disconnection begins to feel like home, and life becomes a series of scenes you're cast in, but never truly inside of. Layer 29. It's the quiet cracks that no one sees that do the most damage. Not every breakdown comes with tears. Sometimes, the real damage happens in the quiet decisions, the skipped meal, the message you don't reply to, the phone call you let ring out even though you miss them. It's in the day you decide not to go outside, not because you're tired, but because the thought of being seen makes your skin crawl. These aren't dramatic choices. No one would notice them unless they were looking closely. But you notice them, and they start to add up. Each one is small, innocent, even. Just this once. You say, you'll explain later. You'll fix it tomorrow. But the cracks widen. Your world becomes smaller. Your presence in it becomes fainter. The people around you think you're just busy, distracted. They tell themselves you're in a phase. But you know something else. You know you've started turning inward in a way that isn't healing, it's hiding. The real collapse doesn't scream. It whispers. It compromises. It negotiates your aliveness piece by piece until you wake up one day and realize you don't remember what it feels like to want to participate in your life. You're still functioning, still replying occasionally, still going to work, but your soul feels like it's sitting down while your body walks around without it. And what's worse, you've become good at explaining it away. You've trained yourself to make excuses that sound responsible, rational, normal. But inside, you feel the truth, you're slipping. Not all at once, just in soft, quiet, irreversible ways. This is the 29th layer, where the damage is invisible to the world, but felt like thunder in your own bones. And the person you're losing isn't someone else. It's the version of you who used to fight harder to stay present. Layer 30. Laughter still happens, but it feels like borrowed light. Strangely, there are still moments that make you laugh. A meme, a stupid video, a sarcastic friend. And for a second, it feels like a spark, real, even warm. You think, maybe I'm okay. Maybe I'm getting better. But as quickly as it comes, it fades. And the silence that follows feels colder than before. Because you realize the laughter didn't come from deep within. It didn't crack through your sadness like it used to. It just skimmed the surface. Like borrowed light on a body that no longer glows from within. You can perform joy when needed. You can smile in photos. You can laugh on cue. But you can feel the difference. Real joy expands you. It opens your chest. Makes your breath feel lighter. Makes the world look softer. What you're feeling now is hollow. It echoes. It passes through without settling. Like lighting a match in a room full of fog, the flame flickers. But it doesn't catch. People around you take it as a good sign. You're laughing again, they say. You must be feeling better. And you nod. You don't want to dim their hope. You don't want to explain that you're still underwater. And sometimes things are just funny despite the pain. Not because it's gone. And so, you begin to perform joy even more. Not because you want to lie, but because it's easier than telling the truth, that even your laughter feels unfamiliar, like it belongs to someone else, someone you used to be. This is the 30th layer, where even joy shows up like a stranger. And though your face can still smile, your heart knows the light you're showing others isn't coming from within anymore. Layer 31. It's not that you can't ask for help. It's that you don't know what to say. The thought crosses your mind often. I should talk to someone. You know you're not okay. You feel the weight building, the silence thickening, the emotions circling with no place to land. And yet, when the opportunity comes, when someone asks if you're all right, or when you consider reaching out, you freeze. Not because of pride, not because of shame, but because you don't even know how to explain what's happening inside. You try to form the words, to put shape to the ache, but everything feels too vague, too layered, too complex to fit into a single message or conversation. You think about starting with something small, like, I've just been feeling off. But even that feels like an oversimplification, like pointing at a volcano and saying, it's warm. The scale of what you're feeling doesn't translate. And so, you stay quiet. You compose half messages. You draft long paragraphs in your notes app and delete them. You practice what you might say if the moment comes. But when it does, the words don't match the feeling. And the silence that follows only deepens your loneliness. It's not that you don't want help. It's that help requires language, and your experience has no clean vocabulary, no linear story, just 1,000 threads tangled together, pulling in every direction. You can't unravel them on demand. So instead, you nod when people ask if you're okay. You smile to make it easier. You say, just tired, and hope they don't look too closely. This is the 31st layer, where silence isn't pride, it's paralysis. And the greatest barrier to support isn't resistance. It's the unbearable complexity of your own truth. Layer 32, you start living in third person, just to make sense of yourself. Lately, you've begun to talk about yourself differently, not just in passing, but in reflection. You say things like, she's been struggling, or I don't really know what's going on with her lately, even though you're talking about your own mind. It's not a joke. It's not detachment for fun. It's the only way you've found to give shape to what's happening without being swallowed by it. By narrating your own decline in the third person, you create just enough distance to observe yourself, to analyze your sadness like a scientist might study a collapsing star. Fascinating, tragic, but not personally threatening. You say, she hasn't been sleeping, because saying, I lie awake at night and can't stop thinking about disappearing feels like too much, too raw, too real. This shift in perspective becomes a survival tool. If you can witness your pain instead of embodying it, maybe you can hold on to the pieces just a little longer. But soon, it becomes automatic. You think of yourself as separate, disconnected, the way a writer thinks of a character they haven't quite figured out yet. You wonder, what will she do next? How bad will she let things get before she breaks? And even as you move through your own life, it no longer feels like you're the one in control. You're just a spectator, a voiceover. And the most devastating part is how natural it begins to feel. As if disowning your own experience is easier than trying to make sense of it from the inside. Because being the observer hurts less than being the one falling apart. This is the 32nd layer, where your identity fractures into distance. And you begin referring to yourself like a stranger, because closeness to your pain now feels too dangerous to carry directly. Layer 33. You get good at saying you're tired, because it's the only truth you can bear to share. There's one phrase that always feels safe. I'm just tired. It's vague enough to be accepted, soft enough to sound normal, and real enough that no one questions it. Because you are tired, endlessly, deeply, in ways that sleep can't touch. But what you're really saying isn't about rest. It's about everything else. About emotional fatigue. About spiritual weariness. About the invisible load you've been carrying for so long that it now lives in your bones. People hear it and nod sympathetically. They talk about long work weeks or bad sleep or too much caffeine. And you let them. Because telling the real truth, that your soul feels like it's dimming, that your will to participate in life is flickering, feels too dramatic, too heavy for casual conversation. So you say you're tired, and you mean it, but not in the way they think. Eventually, it becomes your go-to response. For everything. For why you didn't text back. For why you left the party early. For why you've stopped showing up to things that used to matter. It's a shield, a code word, a placeholder for a truth you can't speak aloud. And in the quiet moments, you whisper it to yourself, "I'm just tired," as if it will somehow justify the numbness, as if it will forgive you for needing to disappear for a while. And maybe it does, because it's not a lie. It's just the simplest version of a truth too big to carry in daylight. This is the 33rd layer, where exhaustion becomes your language. And the world never hears what you're really saying, because the mask of fatigue speaks loud enough to let them stop asking. Layer 34. The day feels like noise, and the night feels like dread. You don't remember exactly when it flipped, when the daylight stopped feeling like safety and started sounding like static. But now, morning comes, and it feels like a flood of demands. The notifications, the traffic, the conversations you're not ready for. The expectations that feel welded to your shoulders the second your eyes open. Even the sunlight feels too sharp, like a spotlight on a version of you no longer recognize. You move through the day muffled, robotic, like you're just trying to stay ahead of the next thing that needs you. And then night falls. At first, there's relief. No more tasks. No more pretending. No more managing tone or pacing or facial expressions. But the quiet doesn't bring peace. It brings dread, a kind that sits behind your eyes and whispers that the stillness isn't rest, it's exposure. Now that everything else has quieted, you're left with the voice you've been running from all day. The one that doesn't yell, but sinks. The one that doesn't lie, but distorts. The one that lists every failure, every regret, every reason to fear tomorrow. You try to soothe it. A movie. A snack, a scroll through something numbing, but the background hum never leaves. It pulses through your chest and keeps you in limbo, not awake, not asleep, just waiting, dreading, existing in a gray space between fatigue and panic. And somehow, that becomes your routine. This is the 34th layer, where the day overwhelms and the night threatens. And rest stops being something you look forward to and becomes something you can't seem to find no matter how quiet the world becomes. Layer 35. You start to believe that emotional clarity is a luxury you can't afford. You try to figure out how you feel. That's supposed to help, right? Sit down, check in, trace the thoughts, find the cause. But every time you try, you hit a wall. Not a hard one, a soft one, a fog. You reach into yourself and come back with fragments. A little sadness, a little panic, a little boredom, but nothing clear, nothing you can hold and say, "Yes, this is it. This is what's wrong." And so you begin to live without understanding yourself. You make decisions based on fatigue instead of insight. You drift in and out of moods you don't have names for. You react with intensity to something small, and then feel hollow when something big happens. It's not just emotional instability. It's emotional incoherence. Your inner world has become scrambled, a puzzle you no longer have the key for. You listen to others describe their feelings with precision. "I'm feeling anxious because of this," or "I'm grieving this loss." You envy them, not for the pain, but for the clarity, for the ability to name it, hold it, talk to it. Your emotions don't speak clearly anymore. They just knock things over. Eventually, you stop trying. You stop asking yourself why. You learn to ride the waves blindly, some days up, some days down, no explanation. You tell yourself that maybe not knowing is safer. That clarity might only make it worse. And you move forward with a muted understanding of yourself, like someone driving with fogged-up glasses, still moving, still functioning, but unable to see the road. This is the 35th layer, where self-awareness becomes a myth, and you stop trying to make sense of your feelings, not because they've gone away, but because they no longer speak a language you can translate. Layer 36. You're still hoping someone will notice without you having to explain. You keep waiting for someone to ask the right question. Not just how are you, but something deeper, something with weight, something that gives you permission to let it spill. The sadness, the confusion, the fear you've wrapped in silence for so long. You want to be asked in a way that makes it feel safe to answer. But the words never come. Not the ones you need. Anyway, just the usual. Just enough to skate by. And you smile. And you nod. And you answer how you always do. Because the alternative, the real answer, feels like too much to burden someone with. You tell yourself that if someone looked a little closer, if they cared enough, they'd see it. The dull eyes, the clipped replies, the withdrawal disguised as being just busy. You wonder why no one sees it. Or maybe they do, and don't know what to do with it. Or maybe they don't want to know. So you go on, making subtle gestures, hoping someone will catch the signs. The way your voice fades near the end of a sentence. The way you pause too long before saying you're fine. But people are busy, and you're good at pretending. So the signs go unnoticed. And with each unnoticed cry, you feel a little more invisible. You never stop hoping. Though, that one day, someone will ask again, not louder, but deeper, that they'll stop at your front door and say, I see it. You don't have to say it. I see it. This is the 36th layer, where your pain waits quietly beneath the surface, not for rescue, but for recognition. And the silence grows louder every time no one hears it. Layer 37. There's a moment you stop dreaming about being happy. You just wish to feel normal again. Once upon a time, happiness seemed like the goal. Joy, purpose, excitement, all of it felt worth chasing. You had visions of what a good life might look like. You made plans, set goals, followed advice. You believed in better days. But now you'd give anything just to feel okay again. Not even joyful, just normal, balanced, neutral. The kind of state where existing doesn't feel like effort, where waking up doesn't require negotiation. Happiness has become a language you no longer speak. It's not that you're cynical. You're just tired of pretending to want something that feels so far away. You scroll past quotes about bliss and manifestation like someone browsing postcards from a country they'll never visit. You're not angry. You're just removed, quietly resigned. Now, all you want is peace. Not fireworks, not miracles. Just one full day without feeling cracked open. A morning where your chest doesn't feel heavy. A night where sleep comes without the weight of everything you didn't say, didn't do, couldn't be. And that's the heartbreak of this stage, when your desires shrink not because you've matured, but because you've learned to stop expecting anything more than survival. You adjust the bar so low, it touches the floor. And even then, you sometimes fall short. This is the 37th layer, where happiness becomes a memory, and your deepest wish isn't for joy, but for the quiet relief of simply feeling normal again. Layer 38. Your skin feels too thin for the world, but you don't know how to protect it anymore. There's a kind of sensitivity that goes beyond emotions. It's physical, tactile. You feel raw, exposed, like the world is pressing too hard against your skin. The lights feel too bright, the voices too loud. The smallest things startle you. You flinch more easily. You tense up when the phone rings, when someone knocks, when a text pops up. You're not afraid, exactly. You're worn down. Every little input feels like an intrusion. You used to have some kind of barrier, a layer between you and the world. But now, that buffer is gone. Your nerves sit too close to the surface, and everything touches you too much. A sharp tone can ruin your day. A careless word can linger for hours. A single unexpected comment can unravel your whole balance. So you start retreating, not because you dislike people, but because even the possibility of conflict, of noise, of unpredictability, it's too much. You start saying no. You start canceling plans. You start protecting your peace with silence. But even that doesn't always work, because the world still finds a way in. A news headline, a memory, a thought you didn't invite. You used to think you were resilient, and maybe you were. But now, it feels like the armor is gone. Not shattered, just quietly peeled away, one disappointment at a time. This is the 38th layer, where life stops feeling safe, not because it's dangerous, but because your mind no longer knows how to soften the impact of being alive. Layer 39. You begin to worry that this is just who you are now. At first, it was a phase, a bad month, a tough year, something you were passing through. You told yourself it was temporary, a storm to outlast, a chapter to close. But lately, that belief has started to wear thin, because the feelings aren't fading, the heaviness isn't lifting, and worst of all, the sadness no longer feels like a visitor, it feels like a roommate, a part of your daily rhythm. You find yourself wondering, what if this is me now? Not broken, not in crisis, just altered, diminished, muted in ways that used to be vibrant. You look at photos of yourself from years ago, the sparkle in your eyes, the posture, the laughter. It's not envy you feel. It's estrangement. That person feels familiar, but not recent, like someone you used to play, but no longer remember how to become. And when people say, you'll bounce back, you smile, but you don't believe them. Because how do you explain that there's nothing to bounce back to? That whatever you're missing didn't just disappear, it changed. It evolved into this version of you who functions, who participates, who smiles, but doesn't quite glow anymore. This is the 39th layer, where grief turns inward, and the fear grows that this numb, tired version of yourself isn't a chapter. It's the whole book now. Layer 40. You start narrating your own collapse as if it's a story you're watching unfold. It's strange how quickly self-awareness turns into distance. You catch yourself thinking in metaphors, describing your feelings like characters in a novel. You say things like, she's unraveling a bit, or the cracks are widening, even though the she is you. Even though the cracks are not poetic, they're real. They're sleepless nights, lost appetite, days where brushing your teeth feels like climbing a mountain. But describing it like a story makes it easier to bear. If you can frame it with narrative, maybe it feels less chaotic. If you can write the pain in your head like a paragraph, maybe it won't consume you. So you narrate. You imagine what a stranger might say if they were reading your life. You imagine them rooting for you, waiting for the redemption arc, the twist, the quiet turning point. And that's what keeps you going, not because you feel hope, but because you feel watched. You pretend, somewhere deep down, that someone is listening, that someone sees the way you're falling and is willing to wait with you until the climb begins again. But secretly, you're not sure there's a climb anymore. You're not even sure you're narrating the middle of a story. It's beginning to feel like the end, the closing paragraphs, the part where the character fades into something smaller than she used to be. This is the 40th layer, where survival starts to feel like storytelling. And the only way to stay connected to yourself is to describe your own fall like a quiet novel no one else will ever read. Layer 41. You begin to feel like a stranger to your own reactions. The things that used to make you cry don't touch you anymore. The things that never used to hurt suddenly sting. You hear a kind word and flinch. You hear a sharp one and shrug. You can't predict your responses anymore to anything. It's like your emotional wiring has been redone by someone who didn't label the cables. You react too much, or not at all. You laugh at things that aren't funny and go silent during moments when everyone else laughs. This isn't about mood swings. It's deeper. It's a reconfiguration of your sense of self. You used to know who you were, emotionally, at least. You knew what mattered to you, what shook you, what brought you peace. Now you're surprised by your own face in the mirror. Your reactions feel like they belong to someone else. You start asking yourself questions you never thought you'd need to ask. Why did I snap like that? Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I feel anything just now? The gap between what you expect to feel and what you actually feel keeps widening, and with it grows a quiet fear that maybe the version of you who could feel things clearly is gone. You try to find her. You revisit favorite songs, favorite places, favorite memories, but none of it lands the way it used to. And you wonder, not dramatically but deeply, what does it mean to still be alive, but to no longer recognize how your own heart beats? This is the 41st layer, where your emotions no longer answer when called, and the person inside you begins to drift further from the person the world still sees. Layer 42, you start measuring time by what you avoid, not by what you do. You used to mark time by milestones, birthdays, events, completed projects, firsts. Life had shape, a rhythm, some kind of momentum. Now, time moves in avoidance. You count weeks since the last time you responded to a message. You mark how long it's been since you returned a call. You track the days since you last left the house, not with shame, but with a kind of dazed awareness, like watching water evaporate without realizing you were thirsty. You don't remember the last thing you accomplished, but you remember the last thing you skipped, the friend you didn't reach out to, the gathering you ghosted, the appointment you rescheduled again, not because of conflict, but because you couldn't bear the thought of being perceived. Even existing in the world feels like something you need to recover from in advance. This slow pull toward inertia doesn't feel like rest. It feels like being buried softly, politely, like the world is happening somewhere far away, and you're observing it from a padded room with no clocks, no mirrors, and no noise. You begin to forget what you used to love, not because you've replaced it with something else, but because the gap between intention and action has grown too wide. You think of doing something, anything, and then the thought fades, and you're left watching another hour disappear. This is the 42nd layer, where life no longer feels like something you live forward, but something you slowly back away from, trying not to be noticed. Layer 43. You begin to feel like you're apologizing just for existing. It starts small, a casual sorry, when you speak too long in a conversation. A quiet, "I didn't mean to bother you," when you message a friend. At first, it seems polite, self-aware, but over time, it becomes automatic, reflexive. You apologize not for mistakes, but for your presence, for taking up time, space, attention. Eventually, you start filtering everything you say through a lens of, will this inconvenience them? Will they think I'm too much? Will they wish I hadn't reached out at all? You write and rewrite messages. You read into every pause. You assume that even silence is disappointment you've earned. You don't want to be a burden, so you begin erasing yourself before anyone else has the chance to. Even the people who love you feel distant, not because they've changed, but because you've begun shrinking in their presence. You stop sharing the heavy stuff. You keep your voice light. You pretend you're fine so they won't worry, so they won't turn away. But you feel it, the weight of your own self being tucked in, minimized, folded small enough to be less noticeable. And inside, something breaks, not with noise, but with exhaustion. Because apologizing for your existence is like quietly telling yourself, again and again, you are too much. You are unwanted. You do not deserve to be here. This is the 43rd layer, where your language becomes soaked in guilt, and every "I'm sorry" becomes another way of saying, please don't abandon me for being real. Layer 44. You start to detach from future versions of yourself. You used to imagine future you with clarity, who she might become, what she might learn, where she might live. You had versions of her tucked away like bookmarks in your mind. One who travels, one who heals, one who creates something meaningful. But now, when you try to picture her, there's just fog, static, silence. She doesn't appear. Or if she does, it's blurry, distant, like a stranger who shares your name but nothing else. It's not that you've stopped caring. It's that you've stopped connecting. Somewhere between now and someday, the bridge collapsed, and you've stopped crossing over. You live in short loops now, from waking to sleeping, from Monday to Friday, from meal to meal. You think, just get through this part. But you no longer know what this leads to. The story no longer feels linear. It just circles. When someone asks, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" the question feels absurd. Not painful, not frightening, just irrelevant. Like asking a ghost what they plan to do next year. Because to plan, to hope, to prepare, it requires belief. And belief is hard to hold on to when the future no longer feels like yours to imagine. This is the 44th layer, where time becomes untethered, and the idea of who you might become is no longer a guiding star, just a fading echo in the distance. Layer 45, you catch yourself smiling at nothing, just to feel like a person again. It happens in the mirror, in an empty room, in the middle of brushing your teeth or folding laundry. You force a smile, not for anyone else, but for yourself. You hold it for a few seconds, like you're testing something, like you're checking if the machinery still works. And for a moment, it does. Your reflection looks normal, almost human, almost like someone who's okay. Then the moment passes. The smile fades, the weight returns, and you're left with the realization that you were pretending, even alone. Not out of vanity, not out of ego, but out of desperation. You just wanted to see yourself looking okay. You just needed to imagine, even briefly, what it might feel like to exist without this ache. So you practiced. You smiled. And that's the part that stings. That smiling, something so natural, so spontaneous, has become something you rehearse. Like laughter in a bad play. Like trying on an emotion that no longer fits. And in doing so, you realize how far you've drifted from the simple ability to feel joy without permission. This is the 45th layer, where the smile becomes a mask you wear for yourself, and the mirror becomes the only witness to how hard you're trying to feel like you still belong inside your own skin. Layer 46. You stop feeling proud of the things that used to define you. There was a time when you found comfort in your strengths, your creativity, your discipline, your resilience. You built an identity on showing up, on doing the hard things, on being dependable. And when life got difficult, those traits were your anchors. They reminded you who you were. They gave you meaning. But now, when you think of those same qualities, they feel distant, hollow, like echoes from a different life. You get through the day, but not with excellence, just with effort. You hit the bare minimum. You meet the deadline, but you don't care about the outcome. You offer support, but it feels like a script. The things that once made you feel alive, your ability to solve problems, to comfort others, to make something beautiful, now feel like tasks you perform out of muscle memory. You're still doing them, technically, but the pride is gone. The joy is gone. The you is gone. You scroll past accomplishments from others and feel nothing but a quiet ache. Not jealousy, just a reminder of how long it's been since you felt connected to something you were proud of. You used to have fire. Now you just have friction. Movement without momentum. Presence without passion. And that's the quiet erosion no one sees. You're still functioning, still producing, still playing your part. But it feels like watching someone else live your old life while you observe from a place just slightly out of reach. This is the 46th layer, where your talents become hollow tools, and the identity you once found pride in becomes something you wear like an old uniform, no longer a fit, but too familiar to take off. Layer 47. You wake up feeling like you've already failed the day. The day hasn't started. The sun is barely up. No one's asked anything of you yet. And still, you wake with that familiar weight in your chest, the sense that somehow, you're already behind, that even before your feet touch the floor, you've missed something, broken something, disappointed someone. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, trying to name what you've done wrong. But there's no specific reason, just the heaviness, the shame without a trigger. You try to push yourself out of bed, telling yourself that once you move, once you get going, the feeling will pass. But it lingers, through breakfast, through the first email, through the quiet moments between tasks. It follows you like a shadow that whispers, "You're not doing enough. You're not enough." And so the day becomes a performance, not to impress, but to prove you're still capable, still trying, still worthy of being here. You check things off your list, not for satisfaction, but for survival. Because maybe, just maybe, if you do enough, the shame will let go. But it doesn't, because the shame isn't tied to action, it's tied to existence. It's the feeling that simply being awake is already a burden, and there's no to-do list that can undo that. This is the 47th layer, where the morning brings no renewal, and you begin each day not with hope, but with the quiet belief that you've already let the world down just by waking up. Layer 48. You find yourself avoiding eye contact, even with people who love you. It's not about lying. It's not about hiding anything specific. It's just that looking someone in the eye has started to feel too vulnerable, too exposing. You fear that if they hold your gaze long enough, they'll see through you, see the weariness, the detachment, the pain you've kept so carefully tucked away behind your voice and your smile. So your eyes shift. You look at your phone, at the wall, at the floor. You ask questions that redirect attention. You nod at the right moments. Give reassuring sounds when needed, but avoid the one thing that might break the spell: connection. It's not that you don't want to be seen. You do, desperately, but not like this. Not in the middle of your unraveling. You want to be seen as you were, vibrant, capable, calm. Eye contact threatens that illusion. It opens the door to a truth you're not ready to name aloud. And the worst part? Even with people who do see you, even with those who love you deeply, it still happens. Because love doesn't erase shame. And kindness doesn't cancel the fear that you are becoming too much. This is the 48th layer, where your eyes become the last place you feel safe. And you avoid the windows to your own soul, because you're afraid someone else might look in and find the part of you you've tried hardest not to feel. Layer 49. You start avoiding things you used to love, because they remind you of who you were. At first, you think it's just disinterest, a passing phase. You set down the book halfway through and don't pick it up again. You ignore your sketchpad. You scroll past the playlist that once made you feel like your chest might burst with something bright. But slowly, you start to realize it's not boredom. It's grief. Avoidance. You're not just losing interest. You're avoiding the parts of life that used to make you feel alive, because they now highlight the distance between who you were and who you've become. The song that once made you dance now makes you ache. The park you used to walk in feels like a museum of your past self. The one who laughed there, who dreamed there. It's not just that you don't enjoy these things anymore. It's that they've become mirrors, and you're afraid of what they might reflect. So you retreat. You keep your world small, predictable, neutral. You stop reaching for the things that used to ignite something inside you, not because they hurt you directly, but because they remind you of the version of you that could still feel. And maybe one day, you'll return to them. Maybe those songs, those spaces, those passions will feel like home again. But right now, they feel like reminders of a you that you've quietly stopped believing in. This is the 49th layer, where joy becomes a trigger, and the things you used to love become too painful to touch. Not because they're broken, but because you are. Layer 50. You become hyper-aware of how loud your silence has become. It's not just that you don't talk about it. It's that the silence itself has taken on a sound, a presence. You feel it in rooms with other people, in the pauses you don't fill, in the thoughts you censor before they ever reach your tongue. You feel it when you're alone, in the way your chest tightens during the quiet, not because of loneliness, but because of all the things you've chosen not to say. You catch yourself wanting to speak, to admit that you're tired, that something's wrong, that you don't know how to be okay anymore. But the words never leave your throat. Instead, they stay coiled inside you, sentences that never got born, conversations rehearsed and then abandoned. And the more you don't speak, the louder the silence grows. It buzzes in your ears. It sharpens your self-doubt. It builds a wall between you and the people who think they know how you're doing. Because how can they know? When the silence you sit in has become its own language. Sometimes someone asks, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" And you smile. You say, "Just tired." But what you want to say is, "I don't remember the last time I felt like myself." And I'm starting to worry that maybe this new silence is me now. This is the 50th layer, where unspoken truths become their own weight. And the silence around you begins to echo louder than anything you could have said out loud. Layer 51. You start feeling like an echo of yourself, not the source. There's something subtle that shifts, not all at once, but over time. You begin to notice that your reactions, your expressions, your very presence feel delayed. Like you're not the one initiating anything anymore. You're just reacting, mimicking, echoing what the world expects from you. You laugh a second too late. Your answers feel rehearsed, even though no one coached you. You nod in conversations, but feel no ownership of your words. You show up to events, but you're only half there, a faded imprint of someone you used to fully inhabit. It's not that you've stopped caring. It's that the connection between you and your actions feels frayed. You do things because they're what you used to do. You say things because they sound like something the old you might say, but you no longer feel like the source of any of it. And what's haunting is how convincing the echo is. Most people can't tell. You're still showing up, still responding, still existing in the right shapes. But inside, the real sound is gone. What's left is a reflection, a practiced version, something quieter than truth. This is the 51st layer, where you stop feeling like a person in motion and begin to feel like a memory still playing on loop, hoping no one notices the volume has faded. Layer 52. You feel more comfortable in conversations that don't involve you at all. Lately, you find yourself drawn to spaces where no one asks you anything. Group chats where you can observe without replying. Podcasts where people talk for hours and never need your input. Coffee shops where you can sit anonymously. Just another body in a seat. There's something deeply comforting about being near voices, yet not inside the conversation. Like watching a storm from indoors, close enough to witness, far enough not to be soaked. It's not that you've stopped caring about connection. You just don't want to be seen right now. Or worse, misunderstood. Because you no longer trust your own words. They come out jagged, or too polished, too distant, too wrong. So you avoid the risk of speaking entirely. You listen. You nod. You echo back phrases that feel safe. But you never reach for anything deeper. Because deep has started to feel dangerous. You weren't always like this. You used to lean in. You used to bring stories. You used to laugh in the middle of your own sentences. Now, you curate silence like a skill. You master the art of disappearing while still being present. You find comfort in other people's noise because it drowns out the sound of your own unraveling. And the more you practice invisibility, the more it becomes who you are. Not lonely. Exactly. Just distant. Detached. A ghost with good manners. This is the 52nd layer, where the safest conversations are the ones that don't ask for your voice. And you begin to disappear in the presence of others, simply because it's easier than showing them what's really left inside. Layer 53. You keep making plans you secretly hope will be canceled. The calendar isn't empty. In fact, it's full. Dinners, calls, coffee dates, meetings, all the signs of a functioning social life. But beneath the surface, there's a quiet tension. Every time a plan approaches, you find yourself hoping, just a little, that something will come up, that they'll reschedule, that the weather will change. That something, anything, will give you a reason to stay home without having to explain yourself. And when a message arrives, "Hey, can we move to next week?" you feel relief wash over you so fast. It almost frightens you. You respond with warmth, with understanding, with kindness. But inside, you're not just okay with the cancellation. You're grateful. It feels like a gift, because showing up has started to feel like performance, like holding up a version of yourself that takes too much energy to maintain, even when the people are kind, even when the plans are fun. There's a pressure in being seen, a weight in pretending to be okay enough to enjoy something. So you keep making plans, because that's what a normal life looks like. But each one comes with a quiet hope that it won't happen. And you begin to wonder, are you lonely? Or are you just exhausted from the work of showing up as someone you no longer feel like? This is the 53rd layer, where connection becomes obligation. And the anticipation of cancellation brings more comfort than the plan itself ever could. Layer 54. You start forgetting what rest is supposed to feel like. You lie down. You close your eyes. You sleep. But when you wake up, the exhaustion is still there. It sits in your shoulders. It hums behind your eyes. It lives in your bones. It's not just physical. It's something else. Something deeper. A fatigue that no nap can fix. A heaviness that outlasts the night. You try different routines. Better sleep hygiene. Fewer screens. More meditation. But nothing seems to touch the kind of tired you're carrying. Because it's not just about rest. It's about what you've had to hold in silence. About all the things you've carried for so long. They've become part of your posture. Your breath. Your thoughts. And the worst part is that rest starts to feel unfamiliar. Like you no longer trust stillness. You lie down and your heart speeds up. You try to breathe slowly. And your mind spirals. Rest is supposed to be the place you go to refill yourself. But now, it feels like confrontation. With the thoughts you've outrun all day. With the grief you've silenced. With the fears you've masked with motion. So you stop looking forward to rest. You start dreading it. You fill your nights with distractions. You stay up later than you mean to. You sleep too long, or not at all. And still, the fatigue stays. A quiet ache that no amount of sleep seems to erase. This is the 54th layer, where rest stops being healing and becomes just another reminder that even silence doesn't bring you back to yourself anymore. Layer 55. You get caught between wanting help and wanting to be left alone. You find yourself stuck in a strange space, one that keeps pulling you in two directions. On one hand, you want someone to notice, to step in, to ask the right question and stay long enough to hear the honest answer. You want someone to gently insist, to remind you that you're not a burden, that you matter. But on the other hand, you can't bear the idea of being perceived, of someone seeing you like this worn down, half-lit version of yourself. So you push people away quietly, kindly. You don't answer the message right away. You keep things surface level. You become hard to read. You convince others, and maybe even yourself, that you're just busy, just distracted. And then, when they leave you alone, you feel abandoned. The space you created becomes too quiet, too wide, too final. You begin to resent the very solitude you designed. You miss the people you held at arm's length. You want to reach out, but pride stops you. Shame stops you. The fear that you've become too much stops you. And so you stay suspended in this painful contradiction, craving care, yet resisting it, needing company, yet rejecting it, hoping someone sees through the silence, but terrified of what they'll find if they do. This is the 55th layer, where loneliness becomes a trap you help build. And the hardest thing to admit isn't that you're struggling. It's that you no longer know how to receive what you need without pushing it away. Layer 56. You begin to mistrust good news. Something positive happens. A small win. A kind message. A plan falls into place. And your first instinct isn't joy. It's suspicion. You hesitate. You wait for the catch. You tell yourself not to get excited. Not to celebrate too soon. Because part of you believes, quietly, deeply, that good things are borrowed. That any light is temporary. That the second you trust it, it'll vanish. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when you believed in good fortune, in earned blessings, in kindness for its own sake. But after so many losses, disappointments, silent exits, and emotional blind spots, your nervous system rewired itself. Now, hope feels reckless. Joy feels naive. Peace feels too expensive to own. So when something good does happen, you don't share it. You don't savor it. You downplay it, to others and to yourself. It's not that big of a deal, you say, or it probably won't last. You put up shields against your own joy, not because you don't want it, but because you can't bear the crash if it disappears. This is the 56th layer, where goodness no longer feels safe, and even light feels suspicious, because you've lived in the dark long enough to forget that brightness doesn't always mean it's about to burn. Layer 57. You feel exhausted by the performance of being fine. The word comes out so easily now. I'm fine. It's automatic, instant, smooth. You say it to coworkers, to family, to strangers in passing. It doesn't matter how much weight you're carrying. The response stays the same. Because the world isn't built for your unraveling. It's built for your participation. So you keep showing up. You answer emails. You go to appointments. You laugh at jokes. You function. And every time you do, the people around you see evidence that you're okay, that you're capable, that nothing is falling apart. And that illusion, that image of control, becomes harder to break, even when you need to. Behind closed doors, it's different. The mask drops. You stare at walls. You cry for no reason. You avoid mirrors. You sleep too much or not at all. But no one sees that part, because by the time you step outside again, you've already stitched the mask back on, tight enough that it doesn't slip. And maybe the saddest part is that people admire you for it. They call you strong, resilient, graceful under pressure, and you smile and thank them, all while quietly grieving the truth. I am none of those things. I'm just good at pretending. This is the 57th layer, where strength becomes camouflage, and the energy it takes to appear okay slowly drains the last parts of you that still could be. Layer 58. You catch yourself smiling in public just so no one asks if you're okay. It's not always conscious. Sometimes it just happens. Your lips curve slightly when someone walks past. You laugh politely during small talk. You throw in the occasional, yeah, totally, or same here. On the outside, it looks like you're blending in. Normal, approachable, fine. But inside, you know what you're really doing, managing perception. You smile not because you feel joy, but because you're terrified of what might happen if you don't. If you looked how you actually feel, someone might notice. They might ask. They might try to help. And you're not sure which is worse, the awkwardness of being seen or the fear that even if you were, no one could do anything about it anyway. So the smile becomes a reflex, a small, desperate defense, a placeholder emotion you offer to keep things smooth, to avoid questions, to stay invisible in plain sight. And the longer you wear it, the more detached you feel from others, from yourself, from the truth of your experience. There's a unique kind of loneliness in smiling when your heart is breaking, like watching yourself walk through the world wearing a mask you didn't choose but can't remove. And when someone says, "You're always so positive," something inside you fractures a little, because you realize they're not complimenting the real you. They're complimenting the illusion you've built to hide her. This is the 58th layer, where the smile becomes a barrier, and your own face becomes unfamiliar, because the only version the world sees is the one designed to keep the truth quiet. Layer 59. You feel like a mirror, reflecting everyone else while forgetting your own shape. You've become good at reading others. You sense their tension, their frustration, their joy. You know when to offer a joke, when to back off, when to nod in the right rhythm. You adapt. You reflect. You become what they need you to be, a listener, a cheerleader, a neutral surface. You're always present for their stories, their needs, their moods. But somewhere in all that mirroring, you've lost track of your own shape. It's not selflessness. It's survival. Being attuned to others keeps things smooth, predictable, safe. It gives you purpose, even if it comes at the cost of disappearing. Because when you reflect everyone else, no one has to see the mess underneath. No one has to ask questions you don't know how to answer. But the side effect is quiet devastation. You stop knowing what you feel. You say yes when you mean maybe. You nod at opinions that make your skin crawl. You become everyone's favorite mirror, clear, helpful, supportive, but increasingly blank. And eventually, you stop feeling seen at all. Because how can anyone see you if you've stopped showing them anything that's truly yours? This is the 59th layer, where connection becomes mimicry, and you forget what it feels like to be a person with her own colors, not just a reflection of everyone else's light. Layer 60. You can't tell if you're healing or just getting better at hiding the hurt. You go days without crying. You manage to respond to messages. You even laugh at something, genuinely, and for a moment, you wonder, is this what getting better feels like? But then a wave crashes out of nowhere. A scent, a memory, a silence too sharp, and suddenly, you're right back in it. That hollow place, that ache that lives somewhere behind your ribs and only visits when everything's still. You start to question your progress. Are you really healing? Or are you just becoming more skilled at appearing whole? You've learned the right words to say, the rhythms to follow. You've built a version of yourself that functions just enough to avoid attention. But the pain hasn't left. It's just grown quieter, smarter. It knows when to surface and when to hide. And that's what makes it so confusing. Because to the world, you look better. You're moving again, smiling again, participating. But inside, the wound remains. Not bleeding, but not closed either. Just tucked under layers of performance, habit, and carefully managed silence. This is the 60th layer, where healing becomes hard to define, and you begin to wonder if you're recovering or simply rehearsing what recovery looks like. Layer 61. You begin to dread the question, what have you been up to lately? It seems harmless, casual, just a bit of small talk. But every time someone asks, what have you been up to? You freeze inside. Your mind scrambles, not because you don't have an answer, but because none of the answers feel true, or safe, or shareable. You haven't been up to anything, really. You've been surviving, holding yourself together in invisible ways, navigating emotional quicksand without leaving your apartment. But how do you say that without making it weird? So you lie, softly. You mention work, a show you've been watching, something productive sounding. You smile while you say it. You keep your tone light. And afterward, you feel this strange hollowness, not because you were dishonest, but because you've started to forget what it's like to live a life that feels worth describing. And it wears on you. That constant translation, that filtering of your reality into something palatable. You avoid check-ins. You dodge reunions. You keep conversations shallow, because you no longer know how to present yourself without pretending. Even writing in a journal feels strange. You stare at the blank page and realize you don't know how to talk to yourself anymore either. This is the 61st layer, where the simplest questions reveal how far you've drifted from your own narrative. And you start to wonder whether your silence is protection or a quiet erasure of the life you used to know. Layer 62. You feel like you're shrinking in your own life. Nothing has visibly changed. Your room still looks the same. Your routine hasn't shifted much. You talk to the same people, go to the same places. But something inside you is smaller, quieter, less solid. You used to take up space in conversations, in plans, in decisions. Now, you hesitate. You wait for others to speak first. You avoid being the center of anything. You pull inward like it's the only way to stay safe. You tell yourself it's just temporary, that you're tired, that you're being mindful. But deep down, you feel it, the slow collapse. Like you're fading into the background of your own story. People don't notice at first, because your outer life remains intact. But you do. You notice the way your voice sounds softer, the way your opinions feel optional, the way you've started saying, whatever you think, more than this is what I want. And with every small retreat, you lose a little more of yourself. Not dramatically, not all at once, just in gentle, quiet ways, until one day, you realize you've stopped showing up for your own life. Not because you don't want to, but because you don't know how to anymore. This is the 60-second layer, where disappearance happens not through isolation, but through erosion, and your presence becomes more of a shadow than a person. Layer 63. You begin to fear that nothing will ever feel new again. There's a specific kind of numbness that settles in slowly, like fog. It doesn't block your vision entirely. It just dulls everything around you. Experiences that used to spark something, excitement, wonder, curiosity, now feel muted, predictable, like you've seen it all before. Even when you haven't. You go to a new restaurant, and the food tastes like background noise. You hear a song for the first time, but it feels like déjà vu. You meet someone interesting, and halfway through the conversation, you're already tired. It's not boredom. It's not ingratitude. It's the quiet horror that life no longer surprises you. That maybe your capacity to be moved has withered somewhere you can't reach. You start wondering if you've already felt all the feelings you're going to feel, and everything else is just repetition. That thought alone carries its own kind of grief. Because how do you keep going when every step forward feels like a variation of something you've already done? You miss awe, not just happiness, not just peace, but the feeling of being awakened by something new. Now, even joy feels recycled. Even pain feels familiar. You begin to wonder if this is what emotional aging feels like. Not growing wiser, but growing unreachable. This is the 63rd layer, where life loses its color, and you start to fear that no matter what happens next, you might never feel new again. Layer 64. You catch yourself hoping something external will force you to stop. You don't say it out loud. You don't even consciously think it most days. But there's a part of you, quiet, hidden, tired, that keeps waiting for something big to interrupt all of this. Not something tragic, just something that gives you permission to stop. An illness, a cancellation, a sudden change. Anything that would let you step off the treadmill without having to explain why. Because you don't know how to stop on your own. Life keeps demanding. People keep expecting. And you keep delivering, even as your insides grow emptier. You wake up, check the boxes, smile on cue. But inside, you're hoping for a pause. A break you don't have to ask for. Something undeniable. Something external. Because asking for it yourself feels like failure. You fantasize about small emergencies. Not because you want chaos, but because chaos might be the only thing loud enough to make the world understand that you need rest. That you're burning out. That you can't keep doing this without disappearing completely. And maybe that's the scariest part, realizing that a part of you is hoping for collapse, because it feels like the only way out of pretending you're fine. This is the 64th layer, where exhaustion starts to crave disruption, and you quietly wish for something to fall apart, just so you don't have to keep holding it all together alone. Layer 65, you begin to detach from your own name. You hear someone say it, your name, and for a moment, it feels foreign, distant, like it belongs to someone else. You respond, of course. You smile. You nod. But something inside you pauses, as if the sound of it no longer fits. Like you've outgrown it, or maybe shrunk beneath it. It's subtle at first. You avoid introducing yourself in groups. You cringe when someone says your name too loudly. You hesitate when writing it in emails. Not because of shame. Not because of anything you can explain. But because the name carries with it a version of you that no longer feels accurate. Your name used to mean something. It held memories, energy, identity. Now, it feels like a label for a version of yourself you can't fully access. The confident one, the hopeful one, the one who knew what she stood for. That version seems far away. And your name, once a symbol of self, becomes more like a shell you continue to carry, even as you feel yourself dissolving inside it. You don't say this out loud, of course. People would think you're being dramatic. But the truth is simple. You don't feel like her anymore. And you don't know what to call the person you've become. This is the 65th layer, where your name stops feeling like home. And you begin to wonder if identity is something you can lose without anyone noticing. Layer 66. You feel a constant pressure to be grateful. Even when you're in pain, you look around and see all the things you should be thankful for. A roof, food, friends, opportunities. You've been taught to count your blessings, to keep perspective, to remember that it could always be worse. And you do. You remind yourself constantly. You list what's good. You try to stay grounded. But there's another part of you, aching, raw, that feels silenced by this gratitude. Because it's hard to admit you're struggling when everything looks fine, when others would give anything to have what you have. So instead of talking about the sadness, you smother it in thank yous. You smile through the pain. You minimize your wounds because they don't seem big enough to deserve attention. But emotional pain doesn't care about privilege. Depression doesn't check your blessings before settling in. Loneliness doesn't wait until you've run out of reasons to be happy. And yet, you keep trying to justify your sadness to yourself, to others, as if permission to hurt has to be earned. You become fluent in disclaimers. I know I have it good, but you cut off your own truth before anyone else can. And eventually, you stop sharing it at all. Because gratitude and guilt have become so tangled. You can't express pain without feeling ungrateful. This is the 66th layer, where gratitude becomes a muzzle. And you begin to feel ashamed of your own hurt, because you were told that having good things should cancel out the ache. Layer 67. You start feeling like you're borrowing time from a life that no longer fits you. You keep doing the things, waking up, going to work, checking the boxes, attending the dinners, smiling at the right moments. But beneath it all, there's a strange and growing feeling that this life you're living doesn't quite belong to you anymore. Like you're borrowing someone else's schedule. Like your routines were built for a version of you that no longer exists. A version who cared more, dreamed differently, felt things with depth. You sit at your desk and go through the motions, but it feels like performing. You hear yourself speaking in conversations you've had 100 times, and it feels rehearsed. You make plans you're not excited about. You say yes to things because it's easier than explaining the hollow space that's replaced your enthusiasm. There's no crisis, no explosion, just a quiet sense of disconnection, like your soul moved out and left your body behind to keep the structure going. You want to pause everything, to reassess, to ask yourself, is this still the life I want? But you're too deep in it, too tired to rebuild. So you keep walking forward, pretending the shoes still fit. This is the 67th layer, where existence becomes habit, and the life you're living feels less like a choice, and more like a set of instructions left behind by someone you used to be. Layer 68. You can't tell the difference between processing and overthinking anymore. You lie awake at night, tracing thoughts like threads, trying to untangle, to understand, to fix. You replay conversations. You dissect your own reactions. You imagine what you should have said. You try to figure out why certain words stung more than they should have. You dig and dig and dig, convinced that if you go deep enough, you'll reach clarity. But the clarity never comes. Just more spirals, more second-guessing, more emotional residue that refuses to settle. And you start to wonder, is this healing, or just mental self-harm dressed up as introspection? You've read the articles, you've journaled, you've tried mindfulness, but your thoughts feel louder than your tools. And what began as self-awareness has turned into self-surveillance. Every feeling becomes data. Every silence becomes a sign. You start chasing answers to questions that don't even matter, simply because the act of solving something gives you a fleeting sense of control. You want peace, truly, but every time you try to rest, your mind interprets the stillness as unfinished work. And so, it keeps going, keeps analyzing, keeps you awake, not because you want to stay up, but because you're afraid of what it means to stop thinking. This is the 68th layer, where reflection turns into obsession, and the boundary between healing and hurting yourself with your own thoughts begins to dissolve. Layer 69, you start to miss people you've never even met. It's not loneliness in the traditional sense. You have people. Some of them care deeply. some check in, some make you laugh. But still, you feel this persistent ache, a longing for a connection that hasn't happened yet, a yearning for someone who just gets it, who sees you without effort, who understands the words you haven't said, someone who doesn't need an explanation to stay. You find yourself writing letters you'll never send, having conversations in your head with a stranger who always says the right thing. You imagine the presence of someone who holds your sadness gently, not with solutions, not with questions, just with presence. And somehow, that imagined person feels more comforting than the ones who are actually around you. It's not a rejection of your current life. It's not bitterness. It's hope. A quiet, aching hope that somewhere, someone exists who will sit with your silence and not feel uncomfortable, who won't call you dramatic, who won't ask for proof, who will look at you, even at your worst, and not flinch. This is the 69th layer, where longing takes the shape of fiction, and you begin to grieve the absence of a connection so specific, so essential, it feels like remembering someone you've never known. Layer 70. You begin to feel like you're constantly interrupting your own life. You'll be doing something ordinary, making tea, folding laundry, scrolling your phone, and suddenly, it's like you've tripped over your own thoughts. A wave crashes in, a sharp, uninvited reminder, a fragment of something you thought you'd buried. You pause, you stare, you forget what you were doing. Your breath changes, just slightly. You try to recover, to pick up where you left off, but the rhythm's gone. The normalcy has been derailed. It's not dramatic. It's subtle. It's like someone keeps tugging the thread from inside your chest, unraveling you in tiny loops. You lose time. You lose focus. And you start to expect it. You brace yourself for the next interruption, like a glitch in a song that keeps skipping at the same place. Only now, you've memorized the skip. Your life becomes full of almosts. You almost enjoyed that show. You almost relaxed during that walk. You almost laughed at that joke. But just before the feeling settles, something inside pulls you out of it. And it's exhausting. Not just because of what you're feeling, but because of how often you're being pulled away from feeling anything at all. This is the 70th layer, where your thoughts become tripwires. And the hardest part of every day isn't surviving. It's trying to live inside moments that keep slipping through your fingers. Layer 71. You realize you're not sure if you're being brave or just numb. You keep going. That much is true. You show up. You keep moving. You do what needs to be done. And from the outside, it probably looks like strength, like resilience, like you're pushing forward through difficulty with admirable determination. But inside, you're not so sure, because it doesn't feel like courage. It feels like nothing. You're not facing fear. You're not overcoming doubt. You're just not feeling much of anything anymore. The highs don't register. The lows don't hit as hard. It's all muted, flat. You still laugh. You still react. But it's automatic, like your emotional muscles are moving from memory. And so you start to question yourself. Is this what strength looks like? Or is this what surrender feels like when it dresses up as functionality? Are you brave? Or are you just too tired to care? There's a specific kind of sadness in that question. Because bravery is something you want to believe in. You want to think you're fighting for yourself. But if you're honest, you're not sure if you're climbing or just floating, drifting. This is the 71st layer, where survival starts to mimic strength. And you can't tell if your silence is resolve or just the absence of anything left to say. Layer 72. You begin to feel like even your memories are tired of you. You try to remember better times, not just in vague sentiment, but in detail. The laughter in that room, the smell of that place, the exact way sunlight landed on the wall that day. But the more you try to summon them, the fuzzier they become, like the past is dissolving in slow motion. Not gone, just out of reach. And it's not just nostalgia. It's something heavier. It feels like even your own history is slipping away from you, as if your memories have grown distant, disinterested, tired of showing up for a version of you who's no longer fully present. You wonder if it's your brain protecting itself, or if it's just wear and tear, the mind's quiet way of saying, you've carried too much for too long. There's grief in this, not just for what you've lost, but for the fear that you're losing even the good parts, that the joy you once felt is evaporating, not only from your days, but from your record of them. You start journaling, not to reflect, but to preserve, like writing down the names of people before you forget them, like labeling old photographs. Because if your memories leave too, what's left? This is the 72nd layer, where even the past feels distant, and you begin to wonder whether your own story is slowly fading, not because it's over, but because it's getting too heavy to hold. Layer 73. You start to feel like a placeholder in your own relationships. You're still invited, still included, still tagged in photos, messaged in group chats, added to plans. From the outside, nothing has changed, but inside, something's off. You don't feel chosen anymore. You feel slotted in, like a placeholder, like someone whose presence is convenient, expected, routine, but not essential. You're not angry. You don't even blame anyone. It's not neglect. It's not cruelty. It's just that the warmth you used to feel, the genuine pull of mutual connection, has cooled into something functional. Your conversations skim the surface. Your texts feel like maintenance. And when you speak, you notice how often no one asks a follow-up. You begin to wonder if they'd notice if you stopped trying. If you didn't show up, would they reach out? Or just shift the circle around the space you left? So you test it. You pull back just slightly. You reply a little slower. You stop initiating. And as the silence grows, you realize something painful. You've become a name on their list, but not a weight in their heart. This is the 73rd layer, where presence feels performative, and you start to feel like a role someone is used to seeing, but no longer deeply needing. Layer 74, you stop expecting things to get better, not out of pessimism, but fatigue. Hope used to be your lifeline, a belief that something was coming, that if you held on long enough, something would change. And for a while, that belief sustained you. It kept you climbing, kept you breathing through the heaviness. But lately, hope feels heavier than despair. It's not that you think things will get worse. It's that the energy it takes to believe in better feels out of reach. You're tired of pep talks, of mantras, of visualizing brighter days. You've done it for so long and seen so little change that your hope has started to feel like a debt you keep paying with no return. You still go through the motions. You still answer when people say, "It'll pass," with a nod. But inside, you've stopped counting down to a turning point. You no longer expect the wave to crest. You just float, quietly, waiting without waiting, surviving without expecting relief. And maybe that's what breaks you more than sadness, the absence of anticipation, the stillness where longing used to live. This is the 74th layer, where hope doesn't die loudly. It simply slips out the back door, unnoticed, and you stop chasing better because the chase itself has become too much to bear. Layer 75. You begin to mistrust the feeling of peace when it finally arrives. It happens unexpectedly. A quiet moment, a good day, a few hours without anxiety pressing into your ribs. For once, you feel okay, grounded, almost light, and instead of leaning into it, you brace, you tighten, you wait for the catch, because peace has become suspicious, a signal, not of calm, but of impending collapse. You've learned that relief is often followed by pain, that whenever you exhale, the next inhale might choke. So even joy becomes a red flag. Even rest feels dangerous. Your nervous system doesn't recognize safety anymore. It only knows patterns. And the pattern has taught you that good things are short-lived, and comfort is always followed by loss. So you sabotage it, gently. You find something to worry about. You distract yourself with worst-case scenarios. You pick at your own calmness like a scab, not because you want to, but because it feels more honest than pretending peace is here to stay. This is the 75th layer, where serenity becomes unsettling. And even silence feels like the prelude to noise, because your mind no longer knows how to accept stillness without preparing for the storm. Layer 76. You start apologizing in advance for the things you haven't even done yet. Before you even speak, you feel the need to soften your presence. You start messages with "sorry if this is weird," or "I don't want to bother you," but you give disclaimers before you share a thought. You downplay your needs before anyone has a chance to reject them. It's like you're trying to preemptively make yourself smaller, just in case. This isn't about politeness. It's about fear. A fear that your existence might be too much, that your voice might irritate, that your feelings might be dismissed. So you start shrinking before you even step into the room. You offer emotional footnotes with everything you say, as if trying to convince others and yourself that you're worth the space you're occupying. You've internalized rejection so deeply that you now try to earn permission to speak by first apologizing for existing. And most people don't even notice. They think you're considerate, gentle, easy to talk to, but they don't see the bruising beneath your kindness, the constant calculation of how to express yourself without making anyone else uncomfortable. This is the 76th layer, where you start anticipating rejection before it happens, and every sentence becomes a delicate negotiation between telling the truth and being allowed to stay. Layer 77. You can't tell if you're avoiding conflict or abandoning yourself. You find yourself biting your tongue more often, choosing silence instead of honesty. Not because you don't have a voice, but because the cost of using it feels too high. You tell yourself you're choosing peace, that you're being mature, that not every battle is worth fighting. But slowly, your silence starts to feel like surrender, not just of an argument, but of yourself. You agree with things you don't believe in. You smile at comments that hurt. You say it's fine when it isn't. And afterward, you feel this quiet ache, not from what was said, but from what you didn't say. From all the times you walked away from yourself to keep the surface calm. And it builds. Over time, these micro-abandonments begin to change you. You become more palatable, less opinionated, more flexible, less real, until one day, you realize you've been choosing harmony over truth for so long that you don't remember the sound of your own voice unfiltered. This is the 77th layer, where the line between being gentle and being absent blurs, and you begin to wonder if keeping the peace is just a polite way of disappearing. Layer 78. You feel like you're always grasping for a version of yourself that's just out of reach. There's this image in your head, a version of you who feels stable, grounded, whole. She's not flawless, but she's intact. She makes choices with clarity. She speaks with ease. She feels joy without second-guessing it. You know she's real, or at least, she was. You remember her in pieces, in photos, in echoes of old memories. But now, she feels distant, like someone you once knew, now fading out of frame. You keep chasing her, through self-help books, through routines, through therapy and reflection and long walks. And for a moment, you'll get close. You'll feel like you're almost her again. You'll say the right thing. You'll laugh at the right time. But then, something pulls you back, a mistake, a spiral, a random ache, and she slips away again. And the grief that follows is quiet but deep, because it's not just about feeling broken. It's about feeling like you're always almost better, almost there, almost healed, but never quite catching up to the person you believe you're supposed to be. This is the 78th layer, where recovery becomes a chase, and you begin to fear that the version of you you're trying to reclaim may no longer exist in the place you're searching. Layer 79. You start measuring time not by days, but by energy left. You stop asking, "What day is it?" because the days have blurred. The calendar becomes less important than the internal battery you wake up with, or without. Some mornings feel heavy before you even sit up. Some nights end with nothing left but a quiet ache and the hope that sleep will reset you. The structure of your life, morning, noon, night still exists. But your real schedule is written in levels of depletion. You begin turning down plans not because you're busy, but because you're running low. You skip calls, delay replies, put off errands. You tell yourself you'll do them tomorrow. Not because you're lazy, but because your mind and body are working overtime just to maintain basic presence. Even eating feels like a decision that costs something. Even joy requires more energy than you have to spare. And so, your world shrinks. Not out of choice, but necessity. You protect what little remains of you by rationing it out. A few words here, a quick task there, then back to quiet. And eventually, it stops feeling abnormal. It just becomes how you live. This is the 79th layer, where time no longer feels linear, and each day is judged not by what gets done, but by whether you had enough of yourself left to survive it. Layer 80. You begin to feel like a stranger to your own reactions. Something upsetting happens. A message you didn't expect. A conversation that leaves you hollow. But instead of reacting, you freeze. You blink. You stare at the screen, or the floor, or the wall. There's no anger, no sadness, just a delayed recognition that this should have hurt, and the confusion of why it didn't. You used to be reactive. You used to feel things right away. Now, your responses are foggy, dull. You replay situations after they've ended, trying to locate your emotion like a misplaced item. You start to wonder, is this numbness? Is this growth? Is something broken? You don't know. Sometimes the emotion arrives days later, a delayed wave that hits at the worst moment. Sometimes it never comes, and you're left wondering whether the pain disappeared or just moved deeper inside you, where even you can't reach it anymore. This is the 80th layer, where your feelings become distant echoes, and you start to mistrust your own emotional compass, unsure if you're healing, suppressing, or simply shutting down. Layer 81. You keep looking for one clear sign that you're not lost anymore. You tell yourself you'll know it when it happens, that one moment, one shift, one breath that tells you, you're okay now. Maybe it'll be waking up without dread. Maybe it'll be laughing without effort. Maybe you'll catch your reflection and recognize the person looking back. You keep scanning the horizon for that sign, that checkpoint that says you've turned a corner, that you've returned to yourself. But it never quite shows up the way you imagined. Healing doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't arrive as a bold announcement. It creeps in quiet, inconsistent, fragile. So when the good moments do arrive, you dismiss them. You tell yourself it's a fluke, a trick, not the sign, just a temporary accident. And so, you miss your own progress. You overlook the small things, the softer mornings, the deeper breaths, the moments when the ache is less loud, because you're still waiting for something big to tell you it's over, still hoping that the universe will send a final stamp of approval. You made it. You're back. This is the 81st layer, where recovery becomes conditional, and you start to realize that the sign you've been waiting for might not be coming, because maybe healing was never meant to look like proof. Layer 82. You start feeling like every conversation requires a version of you that's no longer available. You notice it slowly, the way certain conversations now feel heavier than they should. A simple "how are you" becomes a high-stakes decision. Do you answer honestly? Do you offer the polite version? Do you construct a middle ground that sounds authentic enough but doesn't reveal too much? You begin tailoring yourself, not out of deception, but preservation. Around some people, you become upbeat. Around others, neutral. You shift your tone, your expressions, your pacing, not because anyone asked you to, but because the real you is too tired, too raw, or too far away to show up fully. And as time goes on, it becomes second nature. You give people the version they're used to, the one who can carry the topic, who can laugh at the right time, who knows what to say. But deep down, you know that version is running on borrowed energy, a character wearing your face. You leave conversations feeling more drained than when you entered, not because anyone was unkind, but because being present now means pretending. And even in moments of care and closeness, You can't shake the feeling that no one has spoken to the real you in a very long time. This is the 82nd layer, where interaction becomes impersonation, and every connection you maintain feels like a quiet distance from the self you're no longer sure how to access. Layer 83. You realize that you're avoiding the mirror, but you don't know why. You don't think about it consciously. You just start to skip it. You brush your teeth looking down. You turn off the bathroom light a little faster. You stop checking your reflection before leaving the house. It's not shame. Exactly. It's something more fragile. A kind of quiet resistance. Like your reflection has become someone you no longer want to meet eyes with. When you do catch a glimpse, it startles you. Not because of how you look, but because of how unfamiliar it all feels. The posture, the blankness, the way your face holds itself like it's been rehearsing neutrality. You look fine, normal, even, but you don't feel connected to the image anymore. It's like seeing a photograph of yourself that doesn't belong to a recent memory, so you begin to avoid it, not out of vanity or discomfort, but out of grief, because something about seeing yourself, really seeing yourself, reminds you of what's been missing, of what used to be there in your eyes, in your half-smiles, in the way you once looked at the world like it was worth reaching for. This is the 83rd layer, where the mirror becomes a place of mourning, and your own reflection starts to feel like a stranger quietly standing in the space where you once lived. Layer 84. You begin to doubt whether anyone truly wants to know how you're doing. People still ask. They send texts. They check in. Sometimes they even say the words, "You can talk to me anytime." And yet, when the moment comes, when the truth rises to your throat, something stops you. Not fear, not shame, just a quiet certainty. They don't really want to know, because what you'd say wouldn't be neat. It wouldn't be short. It wouldn't have a clear arc or a positive spin. It would be messy, rambling, incomplete. It would make the air heavy. And so, you swallow it. You say, "I'm good," or "hanging in there," or "just tired," and the conversation moves on. Eventually, this pattern creates its own loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from constantly feeling like your truth is too much for the room. You begin to assume that honesty is a burden. That pain is only acceptable if it comes with a resolution. That the unfiltered version of your struggle would leave people either uncomfortable or gone. This is the 84th layer, where honesty becomes isolation, and you stop telling the truth. Not because you're hiding, but because you've quietly stopped believing anyone really wants to hold it. Layer 85. You start feeling guilty for the things that once made you feel alive. It sneaks in unexpectedly. A song you used to love, a passion you used to pursue, a place you used to visit just to feel your own pulse again. And instead of joy, it brings something heavier, guilt. Not because you did anything wrong, but because those things remind you of a version of yourself who felt more whole. You remember the way your chest used to open up when the music swelled, the way hours used to disappear while you created something that had no purpose except to exist. You think about how you used to laugh louder, love harder, dream bigger. And now, revisiting those parts of your life feels like trespassing, like showing up somewhere you no longer belong. You try to re-engage. You press play. You pick up the brush. You walk the familiar path. But instead of being transported, you feel disconnected, like the door has been left open to a house you can't quite enter anymore. And the worst part is the shame. Shame that you let those parts of you fade, that you stopped tending to them, that you allowed the exhaustion, the numbness, the world to erode what once brought you back to life. This is the 85th layer, where nostalgia turns against you, and the very things that once made you feel the most alive now serve only to remind you of what you've lost inside yourself. Layer 86. You begin to feel like every emotion is too loud or too quiet, but never just right. It becomes harder to feel things in moderation. When you're happy, it feels fleeting, too small, too fragile, like it could collapse under the weight of your own awareness. When you're sad, it feels like drowning in slow motion. You can't regulate. You can only ride the swings. A kind word makes you want to cry. A delay in someone's response sends you into spirals. You try to tell yourself to calm down, to stay balanced, but your emotions have stopped cooperating with logic. They either roar through you without warning or leave you hollow when you expect to care. You become unpredictable, even to yourself. So you start to perform control. You present calmness. You nod through conversations. You laugh when expected. But inside, you're either flooded or empty. And you start to wonder if emotional regulation is something you've forgotten how to do, or something that was never truly yours to begin with. You stop trusting your own instincts. You question every reaction. You apologize before you finish your sentence, just in case, because you've started to believe that your feelings are always either too much or not enough, and neither one feels safe to show. This is the 86th layer, where emotional volume becomes distorted, and every feeling becomes something you either try to suppress or brace yourself against. Layer 87. You start making jokes out of things that secretly still hurt. People laugh when you bring it up. The failed relationship, the lost opportunity, the moment that broke you a little. You deliver the line with perfect timing, a self-deprecating smirk, the right amount of distance. And they laugh because they think you've moved on, because you sound fine, because jokes are proof of healing, right? But you know the truth. You make it funny so it won't make the room go quiet. You make it funny because honesty still stings. You rehearse your delivery like armor. If you can say it with a smile, no one has to see what's underneath. You start to wonder if you're being clever or just evasive, if humor is your gift or your escape hatch. And the worst part is, it works. The laughter keeps people comfortable. The conversation keeps moving. No awkward pauses, no concerned glances, just a smooth deflection that leaves you lonelier every time. Because while they think you've healed, you're still sitting with the same wound, only now it's wrapped in punchlines. And some nights, you replay the laughter and feel hollow, not proud, because being funny doesn't always mean you're over it. Sometimes it just means you found a way to cry where no one can hear you. This is the 87th layer, where comedy becomes camouflage, and the jokes you tell the loudest are often the ones still quietly breaking you. Layer 88. You stop correcting people when they misunderstand you. It starts off small, a misquoted phrase, a misunderstood tone, a moment where someone gets the wrong idea about your intentions. You feel the urge to speak up, to clarify, to explain. But then the moment passes, and you stay silent. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you tell yourself it's not worth it. But little by little, it becomes a pattern. Someone assumes you're fine, and you nod. Someone laughs off something that hurt, and you don't correct them. Someone gives you credit for being so strong, and you accept it, even though you're barely holding it together. At first, it feels like self-preservation. Then it starts to feel like erasure, because every time you let the misunderstanding stand, a version of you that isn't true becomes part of the story. You become agreeable, easy, harmless, not because that's who you are, but because it's easier than being seen in ways that might create discomfort. And eventually, you wonder if you're being understood at all, or just quietly rewritten in other people's narratives. Not maliciously, not intentionally, just inaccurately. And you're the one letting it happen. This is the 88th layer, where silence becomes complicity in your own misrepresentation. And the desire to be accurately seen is gradually replaced by the quiet resignation of being left out of your own truth. Layer 89. You begin to feel safer in hypotheticals than in real life. You spend more time in your head than in your body. You imagine conversations that haven't happened, conflicts that might arise, outcomes that are unlikely. You rehearse lines, defenses, escapes, and though these mental scenes are often painful or chaotic, they bring a strange kind of safety because they're yours. You control the pacing, the setting, the exits. In real life, things move too fast. Emotions swell before you can name them. People say things you didn't prepare for. You don't know where to put your hands or you're hurt. But in your mind, you're ready. You're composed. You have answers. You have space. So you start living more in that imagined world. It's exhausting, yes, but it also gives you a sense of preparation, a belief that if you think through every worst-case scenario, maybe you can survive the ones that come true. The irony is, life rarely follows your scripts. The fears you rehearse never arrive in the way you expect. And yet, you keep rehearsing, not because it helps, but because you're more afraid of being unprepared than of being unhappy. This is the 89th layer, where imagination becomes armor, and you begin to feel more comfortable with the things you invent than the unpredictability of what's real. Layer 90, you notice that even when you rest, you don't feel rested. You take the day off. You stay in bed. You cancel plans. You turn off notifications. You sleep. And still, when you wake up, the tiredness remains. It clings to your bones like fog. It hums behind your eyes like static. It's not just physical, it's something deeper, something more stubborn, a kind of fatigue that no amount of stillness seems to repair. You begin to realize that this exhaustion isn't coming from lack of sleep. It's coming from the cost of pretending, of holding yourself together in public, of saying, "I'm fine," when you're unraveling, of showing up for the world while silently disappearing from yourself. Rest isn't rest when your nervous system never powers down, when your mind stays on alert even in silence, when peace feels like a costume you wear, not a place you land. And so, you keep trying to rest harder. You meditate, you journal, you unplug, but nothing touches the core of the weariness. Because rest, for you, isn't about stillness, it's about safety. And you haven't felt safe in your own mind for a long time. This is the 90th layer, where exhaustion becomes existential. And you begin to understand that true rest isn't about what you do. It's about who you no longer have to be while you're doing it. Layer 91. You start to forget what you used to want before survival became the goal. There was a time you had plans. Big ones. Small ones. Dreams that sparked something when you thought about them. Even if they felt far away. They gave you direction. They made tomorrow feel like a destination worth moving toward. But lately, survival has replaced aspiration. Getting through the day has replaced building toward anything beyond it. You try to remember what you used to want. A specific job, a type of relationship, a place you wanted to live. But the details are blurry. The pull is gone. You scroll through old notebooks. Past goals written in a version of your handwriting that feels like someone else's. Someone with energy, with hope, with belief. Now, everything is maintenance. Wake up. Stay afloat. Keep functioning. You're not even looking for joy, just the absence of pain. And in that mindset, desire becomes dangerous. Because wanting something you don't have requires hope, requires effort, requires faith. And those things cost more than you can afford right now. So you stop reaching. Not out of apathy, but conservation. Not because you no longer care, but because caring too much while you're crumbling feels like a cruel joke. This is the 91st layer, where ambition fades into background noise. And the life you once imagined for yourself becomes a whisper you're too tired to follow. Layer 92, you feel like you're always behind, even when no one's chasing you. There's no deadline. No one is waiting. No race. No crowd. And yet, you wake up every day with the weight of lateness pressing into your chest. Like you missed something. Like you should have done more by now. Like you're falling short in a race no one else seems to be running, except you. You look around, and everyone seems to be moving forward. Starting things. Building things. Finishing things. Even when they're struggling, they appear to be progressing. And you feel stuck. Frozen in place. Watching the world carry on like a train you keep missing by seconds. You try to pick up speed, to catch up, but it's exhausting because you don't even know what you're chasing anymore. Productivity, healing, belonging. You run in circles. You check boxes. You fill your time. but the sense of delay never leaves. It's not about laziness. It's not about failure. It's something more internal. A clock that ticks louder inside you than outside. A pressure to arrive, even when you're not sure where there is. This is the 90-second layer, where urgency becomes internalized, and the guilt of not enough shadows even your quietest moments of stillness. Layer 93. You begin to wonder if the real you only exists in the version of you that's hurting. You reflect on the way you've changed, not through growth, but through ache. Pain has shaped you, directed you, colored your choices, and you start to wonder, who are you without it? Would you still be thoughtful? Still kind? Still quiet in the right moments and loud in the necessary ones? Or have you become a person sculpted entirely by wounds? You try to imagine yourself without the trauma, without the sadness, without the years of carrying what others never saw. And it feels impossible, like trying to separate fire from smoke, like trying to remember who you were before your world taught you how to protect yourself by softening your voice. You look at the pieces that people admire, your empathy, your resilience, your insight, and realize that many of them were born from pain. And while it's beautiful in a way, it's also heartbreaking, because you begin to ask the question you're afraid to answer. If I ever fully healed, would I even recognize the person left behind? This is the 93rd layer, where identity becomes entangled with injury, and you begin to fear that the most honest version of yourself might only exist inside the hurt you've never fully left. Layer 94. You feel like you're constantly waiting for something that never quite arrives. It doesn't have a name. It's not a person, not a moment, not a grand revelation. But the feeling is there, that something is supposed to happen, something that will finally make everything make sense. You keep looking for it in the quiet parts of the day. You check your phone. You glance at the sky. You pause in doorways. But whatever it is, it doesn't come. And yet, the wait persists. It hums underneath your routines like background music. You go through your day as if it's an intermission, something to fill the time before the real story starts. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that maybe next week, next month, next year, it'll arrive, the message, the change, the shift. But as the days pass, nothing definitive appears, just more waiting. And that waiting starts to shape you. It becomes part of your posture, your decisions, your relationships. You hold back emotionally, creatively, spiritually, because why invest in anything when the real thing you're meant to be part of is still out there? Eventually, you start to fear that the something isn't coming at all. And even more than that, you start to worry that you've spent so much time waiting that you missed what was already here. This is the 94th layer, where hope becomes limbo, and you begin to live in the hallway of your own life, expecting a door to open that might not exist. Layer 95. You start feeling like you're always in the middle of explaining yourself. You begin to notice how many of your sentences start with a disclaimer. What I meant was, it's probably just me, but, sorry, I know that sounded weird. You don't mean to over-explain, it just happens, because somewhere along the way, you stop believing people would understand you the first time, and so you buffer, you soften, you elaborate, you add context and subtext and footnotes to every sentence. You try to fill in the blanks before someone misreads the page, and even when no one questions you, the instinct remains, because being misunderstood now feels more threatening than being ignored. You realize you've started treating every conversation like a courtroom, presenting evidence, clarifying motives, defending tone, and the exhaustion builds, not from the talking itself, but from the fear behind it, the fear of being taken the wrong way, of saying something real and being told it's too much, or not enough, or confusing, or inconvenient. So you rehearse, you rewind, you edit your sentences even as you speak them, and over time, your voice feels less like a tool and more like a shield. This is the 95th layer, where communication turns into defense. And even your most sincere truths feel like something you have to prove in order to be heard. Layer 96. You feel like you're always on the verge of crying, but the tears never come. It's not a breakdown. Not yet. But it's close. A tightness in the throat. A fullness behind the eyes. A kind of emotional congestion that lingers just beneath the surface. You feel it when the room gets quiet. When someone speaks gently. When you catch your reflection by accident. It's there, not loud. Not urgent, but steady. Like a rain cloud that follows you everywhere, but never opens up. You've tried to cry. You've sat still. Tried to coax the feeling out. Even played the sad songs that used to work. But the release won't come. And that stuckness begins to feel like its own kind of pain, not sharp, but aching. Not explosive, but heavy. Like something you're carrying in a part of yourself that doesn't speak the language of words anymore. And it's confusing. Because you're not okay, but you're not breaking either. You're not numb, but you're not feeling in full color. You're in the in-between. The almost. The nearly. The just beneath. And it makes you feel like you're walking through life with a dam inside your chest. One crack away from release. But every day, it holds. And that strength, the fact that it holds, doesn't feel like strength anymore. It feels like entrapment. This is the 96th layer, where sadness gets stuck inside you. And the tears that once brought relief now gather in silence, refusing to fall. Layer 97. You begin to feel like you're always interrupting yourself. You'll start to feel something, a flicker of emotion, a thought rising up from somewhere deep. But just as it begins to take shape, you cut it off. You redirect. You distract. You push it down before it fully forms, not with force, but with habit. It happens mid-conversation, mid-thought, mid-silence. You feel something bubbling up, and you override it with noise. A scroll through your phone, a sudden task, a change in subject. Because to let the feeling finish its sentence would mean listening, and you're not sure you're ready for what it has to say. You've become skilled at interrupting yourself. You can sense when the emotion is about to breach the surface, and you jump in just in time. Not to suppress, but to stall, to buy yourself time, to stay upright. But there's a cost. Because the things you never let yourself finish, the grief, the fear, the desire, they don't go away. They linger unfinished. And over time, you begin to feel like a story that never reaches the end of a sentence. This is the 97th layer, where self-protection becomes self-silencing. And you begin to realize that the loudest thing inside you is everything you keep cutting off before it can fully speak. Layer 98. You find yourself constantly preparing for conversations that never happen. You play them out in your mind, not out of fantasy, but out of necessity. The apology you never received. The confrontation you've been avoiding. The explanation you wish you could give. You rehearse it over and over, refining the perfect balance of honesty and calm. You imagine their response, your counter, the closure. But the conversation never happens. Maybe the person's gone. Maybe they wouldn't understand. Maybe it's too late. So the words stay trapped in you, well-structured, deeply felt, unsaid. And every time you rehearse them, it feels a little less cathartic and a little more exhausting. You want the conversation, not for drama, not even for clarity, just for the chance to release what's been taking up space inside you. You want to feel heard, not agreed with, not fixed, just heard. But instead, you carry the script with you like a folded letter you never mail. And the weight of it builds. Not because the words are heavy, but because they never land. This is the 98th layer, where imaginary conversations become emotional storage units. And you start to wonder if speaking your truth in silence is better than not speaking it at all. Layer 99. You start feeling like you're disappearing in rooms where you used to feel most alive. It's not the place that changed. The room is still familiar. The people still smile when you enter. The routines still unfold like clockwork. But something in you has gone quiet. Not shy. Not withdrawn. Just fading. You watch yourself in the group, nodding, listening, replying when necessary, and you realize you're functioning more than participating. You're present in body, but not in spark, not in soul. These were the spaces that used to revive you, that used to bring you back to yourself. A favorite cafe, a friend's living room, a certain song playing in the background. And now, all of it feels distant, like being inside a photograph you once loved, now turned grayscale. No one notices. Why would they? You're still showing up, still laughing in the right places, still contributing just enough. But inside, you feel like a light bulb dimming, not out of burnout, but out of some internal departure you can't explain. This is the 99th layer, where familiarity no longer equals connection, and you begin to feel like a guest in the places that once reminded you were home. Layer 100. You realize you've become the story you never wanted to tell. There comes a moment, quiet, unremarkable, not marked by any dramatic shift, where you suddenly see yourself from a distance. Maybe it's in the way your voice sounds in a recording. Maybe it's the way someone looks at you with concern. Maybe it's just the silence in your own mind when the noise finally subsides. And in that moment, you realize something hard to swallow. This version of you is the one you used to fear becoming. Not because she's broken, not because she failed, but because she stopped pretending. She stopped pushing past the pain, stopped selling the story of strength for the comfort of others. She is tired. She is quieter now. Her eyes carry more questions than answers. But she is real, and that scares you. You used to define yourself by your potential, your ambition, your ability to bounce back. And now, you measure your days by the absence of collapse. You used to have language for everything. Now, there are things you feel that don't fit into words. You used to be the strong one, the capable one, the one others leaned on. And now, you're the one carrying invisible weight, hoping no one notices how much you've changed. But in this realization, painful as it is, there's a strange kind of peace. Because the version of you you're living now may not be the one you once imagined, but she's still here, still breathing, still listening, still holding on. This is the 100th layer, where identity meets grief, and you come face to face with the self you never wanted to become, only to realize she's still worthy of being loved.